I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the December 17th Radnor Township School District regular business meeting. I'd like to report that the board met in executive session on December 10th and this evening earlier, December 17th, to discuss legal and personnel matters. And with that, we'll get right underway with our report from students. Welcome.
Hi, everyone, and all the new faces. I'm Avery. It's nice to meet everybody. So today is a very special school board meeting as we are going to have the opportunity to introduce our newest member, but also say goodbye to Rachel and thank her for the time that she has been here with us. But we will start with our typical recap of what has happened in the last month at Radnor High School. On Wednesday, November 20th, Radnor High School hosted its annual Thanksgiving dinner for all the community members. Ms. Peterson dedicated lots of time to making the evening special for everyone in attendance, and it sure paid off. Russ, along with community members, prepared all the typical Thanksgiving fixings: turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans with those special little onions on top, mac and cheese, and much more. I was one of many volunteers that evening, and it was nice to have the opportunity to interact with our Radnor residents. Continuing with the theme of giving back, Mr. McBride's annual Gifts from the Heart donation drive just wrapped up. Students were able to select a card with the requested gift and earn some NHS hours by turning in the gift. Furthermore, at the beginning of December, the Radnor Model UN team traveled to Rutgers for their first conference of the 2019-2020 school year. It was very successful, with 15 people across 8 different delegations winning an award and Radnor placing the outstanding delegation in the large school division. Radmon hopes to be just as successful in their next 3 conferences in 2020.
In the world of Radnor sports, the boys and girls lacrosse teams are preparing for their seasons with winter training and unofficial wall ball practices. Radnor boys basketball has their annual Silent Night game tonight, where the Radnor Ruckus remains entirely silent until the 10th point is scored. The boys are 5-0 after a huge win against Pencrest, who had won 2 of the 3 past district championships. Girls basketball is 2-1 after a rough loss to Springfield by 1 point. Tonight they take on Harridan. Wrestling started back in November, and they have had a few tournaments and 1 match. Captains Chris Hankel, Bobby Hydrisco, and Damian Falcone have high hopes for the season to come. Radnor boys swimming recently beat Ridley at their meet and then lost to Conestoga. Winter track is off to a great start as star Kira C. Schultz already ran a state's time in the 400-meter race. They have a meet this weekend and 2 others coming up over break.
So now for the important part, saying goodbye to Rachel. 1 year. Wow, I would never have guessed it has been a whole year since we began working together. You have helped me so much through this whole process. On my introduction meeting last December, you told me to prepare something small, a sentence or 2, hi, my name is Avery, and that's about it. And I could barely say my sentence and was shaking the entire time. You helped me to be a better public speaker, be able to say more than a sentence or 2 in front of the board. About 3 months into the board position, you texted me and you said that you weren't going to be able to go. And I was like, oh boy, I'm by myself. But I actually thank you for doing that because it made me confident in my own abilities to speak in front of the board and not to always rely on somebody else. Rachel, you have been there through soccer, school board, and I want to thank you 1,000 times over, and good luck in college. The board and I will miss you greatly, and now it is up to me to fill your shoes and teach Austin the way you taught me.
Thanks, Aves. It's amazing to think that I have served for this board for a whole 2 years now. As I reflect on my time as the student representative to the school board, I have nothing but fond memories. I would like to thank all of you for always making our voices as students feel heard. Thank you for creating a comfortable work environment where even 2 students feel confident enough to present in front of you and the entire community every month. I loved having this position from the beginning, but after joining the policy board, I truly felt like I was making a difference in the community. So thank you for the opportunity to serve on that board as well. There was one moment I'd like to share with you when I particularly felt valued, and it was towards the beginning of my time on the policy board. We were discussing a policy, and I was hesitant to chime into the dialogue that was going on, but I shared my perspective on things, and to be honest, I don't remember what we were discussing. The conversation continued, but after the meeting, Mr. Madden, who's no longer here, stopped me as I was leaving and told me that what I shared with all of you that night was extremely valuable to all of you, and he was really happy to see that sort of contribution, and he told me that the board was lucky to have me. This is the sort of inclusion and encouragement you all had for me, and I'm so appreciative of. That moment really resonated with me and encouraged me to participate in the future. Additionally, I'd like to thank Amy Goldwyn and Mr. Batchelor especially for all their guidance and encouragement during my time of service in either position. Amy, who's not here, but I hope you watch this video. Amy, you were the first board member to make me feel welcome here, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your guidance. Thank you for all of your hard work in this community and caring so deeply about all of us. It was your passion and aptitude for public policy that encouraged me to be my best in these roles, and for that I can't thank you enough. Mr. Batchelor, although we didn't work on the policy board together for very long, we saw a lot of each other at a number of sleep study events. I'd like to thank you for calling on me to speak on behalf of Radnor and our experience and giving me the opportunity to convey the Radnor response to the change in start time. These events that I went to were a true test of my confidence in front of large groups, given that they were over 100 people at the last one that I spoke out. This is just one of the many ways that Mr. Batchelor has made student voices feel heard and appreciated. Thank you for all of your hard work and pushing me towards success in this role. And of course, thank you for letting me call a snow day during the policy meeting. All 4 of our policy live streamers heard it from me first. Finally, thank you for all of your hard work and inclusion. I think you are in very great and capable hands. Avery is such an incredible ambassador of our students, and I know Austin will be the same. Thank you.
So now, Rachel, you've got the boot. Austin, you're in. Recently, we interviewed 5 candidates for the school board representative position. We ultimately selected Austin Johnson to be the newest school board member. Austin is a competitive dancer, but makes time to engage himself in multiple activities. During his interview, Austin was personable, funny, and offered strong knowledge on what was going on in the community. Therefore, we believed he would suit this position the best. One piece of advice, don't let your parents find out what channel this is on. But now, let's welcome Austin Johnson as the newest school board member.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. I'm Austin Johnson, a sophomore at Radnor High School. You probably know that already. I'm really excited to be working with everyone here, as well as learning along the way. Thank you.
Thank you all. And now we're going to move right into our report from our superintendent.
Well, welcome, Austin, and Rachel, we wish you well. Thank you for your service. And it was still questionable whether you made the right call on that snow day, but we could discuss that later. You know, I thought it was interesting you guys mentioned, the basketball team tonight has silent night tonight till, you know, maybe we should try that with the board sometime. A silent night meeting starters? No? Any takers? No? All right. Very quickly, just for a superintendent's update, just upcoming events. You know, it's a busy December, January, and you can see all the different events that we have coming up in January. We thought that we wanted to just take a moment in the next slide to talk about what a decade it's been. When we return after break, it'll be 2020. It sounds so futuristic. We started the school year with our staff and faculty talking about seeing with 2020 vision and what is our focus as a school district, knowing that this was the 2019-2020 school year. So we took an opportunity. I know it's hard to see because we crammed a lot of pictures in there from the past decade, but some of those pictures highlight Hall of Fame inductions, Spirit Days, Martin Luther King Day celebrations, Reading Olympics, our Wall of Honor unveiling, math count clubs, Model UN, boys tennis state championship, girls lacrosse, competition also with our math count I mentioned already, our citizenship challenge in Philadelphia. We have the No Place for Hate. We have the Green Ribbon School. We have RHS named Apple Distinguished School, Project Lead the Way Distinguished Schools. Just in many ways an embarrassment of riches, but wonderful things that have been going on, you know, throughout our schools, from our kindergarten to our 12th grade over the last decade. So we wanted to wish everyone not only a wonderful break with break coming up. We still have school for the rest of this week, but we have break coming up. Wish everyone a wonderful break and, you know, a happy new year when we return in January. And last but not least on the list, I want to just mention some of our donors. I want to thank our donors. Special thank you this month to Drexel University for their donation, Villanova University, and our Radnor Educational Foundation. Our Radnor Educational Foundation works so hard each year and brings together our community to fund so many different programs and events at each of our buildings, and you can see this month just some of the things that Radnor Educational Foundation is doing to help support our students and community. So thank you to the Education Foundation and Drexel and Villanova University.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelor. And now for tonight's recognition, we have Ms. Solomon to do our resolution of appreciation.
So it is my pleasure to give this recognition to Rachel. I have a real soft spot for what you kids do because my oldest daughter had this job, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. So the resolution of appreciation is for retiring student representative Rachel Marciano. The resolution of appreciation below has been prepared in recognition of the service of Rachel Marciano, who has served as student representative to the school board and to the School Board Policy Committee. Whereas Rachel Marciano has served the School District of Radnor Township, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, from January 2018 until December 2019 as student representative to its Board of School Directors. And whereas Rachel Marciano has also served the School District of Radnor Township, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, from January 2019 until December 2019 as student representative to its policy committee. And whereas during this time, she has represented the students of Radnor, presenting ideas and positions that have furthered the cause of effective and responsive educational principles and practices within Radnor Township School District. And whereas she has brought to the board an interest in service to education and a spirit of cooperation. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in appreciation for her services, the members of the Board of School Directors hereby recognize and honor Rachel Marciano on this, the 17th day of December 2019. And you get a certificate. Yeah, we're going to just have she does not want to speak, so we're not going to put her on the, she already spoke. She already did her thing. So she's going to present support.
Don't forget yours.
Was it something I said? Sorry, Missy.
All right. We're going to miss Rachel. She's really made an impression. She's an impressive young woman. I'm really going to miss her. Okay, for tonight, we are now going to enter our public comment portion of the meeting. Citizens are encouraged to address the board during this public comment portion on the agenda or other topics related to the Radnor Township School District. We ask that you please print your name on the sign-in sheet at the table at the back of the room. When you come forward, please clearly state your name and your address and topic to be addressed. We do ask that you limit your individual comment to not more than 4 minutes as per Board Policy 006. And should you be unable to attend tonight's meeting, you may submit your comments by email to boardcomments@rtsd.org or in writing to Mr. Michael Petiti, Radnor Township School District, 135 South Wayne Avenue, Wayne, Pennsylvania. If there are questions, the administration will review them and the corresponding answers will be posted on the district's board doc website by the start of the first committee meeting of the following month. Do we have any public comment at this time? Welcome.
I'm going to jump in. There's a swim meet tonight that I would like to get to if I could. My name is Melanie James Cosgrove, 135 Browning Lane. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to make it much hastier than I did last time, I promise. I just do feel it's important that I personally respond to discussions occurring at last week's facility meeting. And then I want to share our excitement about moving forward regarding the pool specifically. I and the Radnor swim community absolutely understand the importance and necessity of accessibility by all swimmers, divers, and spectators. I want to emphasize that point. Our question about the elevator, lumped together with a lobby cost for a $450,000 investment, simply was to inquire whether the facilities concept is indeed pursuing the most cost-efficient yet effective accommodation, considering our limited resources. So please know that my question about the elevator was not at all intended to suggest that we don't support ADA compliance, as we 100% do. So I just want to straighten that. Secondly, a comment arose about communication related to facility plan updates. The swim and dive booster reps were indeed invited to Schrader focus groups and presentation, and were kindly included in all emails sent, or at least key emails sent by Jeff Bujukos. However, through this entire facility planning period, all of last year, between August and May, the pool itself was deemed out of scope, which I think most of you are aware of at this point. So therefore, the formal facility updates and communications, understandably, I guess, did not include the pool. So just to clarify, there definitely were communications, it's just the pool was included out of scope during that period. So you can imagine the angst of the swimming dive community last year when we realized that the district was planning a major facilities upgrade with a scope that excluded its oldest and most utilized athletic facility on RHA's campus. So we reached out to everyone we thought of influence to request attention to the aging 48-year-old natatorium, and also offered our help. We credit the superintendent especially for hearing our plea and for his support, including his attendance at our Central League Championship swim meet last year. In May, we were excited to learn that the board approved a study of the pool, but we wonder why the swim community was not included in this planning process or provided formal updates. It wasn't until the Breslin Report presentation last month that we finally saw inclusion of the pool and some actual concept design. Yet there were still no details related to the systems upgrade line item. And disturbingly, except for a small bump out for the girls, the proposed concept retained the existing inadequate locker room model with minimal showers, 1-2 toilets, and changing space insufficient to support up to our athletes in the early mornings, the PE students during the day, and the 60 plus to hundreds of high school swimmers at the big meets. So hence the public comments and questions that posed at the last November meeting, just so you understand sort of the context behind those questions. But the bottom line is there's great news moving forward. The pool, as a wellness facility that truly services our community of 3,000 plus annually, is now getting much needed attention. We are extremely grateful to the board, superintendent, for encouraging the administration to reach out to the swimming and dive community, and truly thank Mark Brooks, Mike Friel, Michelle Dyko, and Principal Kevkis for actively seeking input from the parents, the coaches, swimmers, and divers over the last few weeks. It's apparent to all of us that you are desiring to understand our concerns related to the 48-year-old filtration system, decking, the locker room, the piping, and other pool mechanics. I do want to make the board aware, though, that this current conceptual plan that you'll be approving tonight does not include the updates as discussed with the swim community. The administration said it could not be updated for the vote. But we do not want to hold up the vote tonight and approval of ADA compliance and updates to other athletic facilities that have already been gone through a thorough assessment. In good faith, we are assuming the pool concept will be updated as discussed, and proper attention, planning investment will be allocated to the pool so that it can remain open safely and reliably, and frankly, with newer infrastructure easier to maintain. Tonight, the pool was closed again at the last moment due to the high pH levels, and a couple of weeks prior due to high bacteria levels. It was closed. Such closures seriously infringe on the training plan of our 60-plus high school swimmers and divers, and not to mention the 120-plus RAC children who plan to attend practice tonight and the last week. Nonetheless, the bottom line is that we've become encouraged, thanks to the latest outreach by the administration, by the specific system upgrades that were outlined for the first time last week publicly with investment dollars associated with it, and by the promise to conduct a more comprehensive study of the pool. We want to thank you all for listening. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Cosgrove. Is there more public comment? Mr. Oh, Mr. Bajukis, please.
So I just want to take a moment to say that I appreciate Melanie coming down and explaining the pool supporters position. I think it's really important for everybody to get on the same page about what this improvement project is going to do for everyone at the school. So there's been communication that's been forwarded to me that I won't go into, that's come from people representing pool boosters that's suggesting, for example, only 6% of the money that's being spent is being spent on pool improvements, that the majority of money is being spent on a field house. That's just not accurate. And I think that in the future, it would be beneficial for groups that want to communicate to their members about what is going on to get together with Mr. Brooks, Mr. Petiti, with Ken, and come up with a communication that's accurate so we don't get people that misunderstand what we're trying to accomplish here. Things like the fitness center, things like the retaining wall, things like, there are a lot of things that are going to be happening, the extra parking on the campus. All of that addresses many issues beyond just field issues. They address safety issues, access issues, and I think it's really important if people are going to communicate to their booster club groups, and that's why I try to lead in that regard, that they communicate accurately so you get an accurate feedback and we don't have wasted time dealing with issues that aren't really issues. I'm thrilled that we're addressing the pool issues from the beginning. I think everybody's been communicating that. The board was aware of that, and we're moving forward in that regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bajukis. Is there more public comment? Welcome.
Hi, my name is Chris Henkel, and I'm here with my sister and my dad in support of the improvements to high school's athletic facilities. This project has been kicked around and talked about for over a year now, and it's long overdue. What you need to remember is that the fields are simply incapable of hosting the handicapped. They're also terribly unsafe. My family and I alone have witnessed several people be injured on both Anki and Prevo, and we've seen people unable to even approach the field safely. I understand that the improvements that will be made are very expensive. However, if they're not made, more people will continue to be injured. More people will be turned away. And pretty soon we'll have injuries, accessibility complaints, and legal complications. Those will prove to be just as expensive. I hope you make the right decision, the easy decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Is there more public comment? Welcome, Lucy.
Hi, my name is Lucy. I'm a sophomore, and I'm here with Chris and my dad. We've been coming to these meetings for over a year now in support of the infrastructure project. So a lot of you already know us, but to the new people, nice to meet you. Me and Chris's brother, Pete, was in a wheelchair because he had a disease called SMA. He and I were twins, and he'd be at the high school right now, but he passed away in January 2018. We come to these meetings in honor of him because the way the high school is right now would never have worked for him to get around. Even just going to the football games, Pete would have to sit separate from the bleachers with his friends because he couldn't get onto the home side bleachers. And he and a few of his, getting onto Anki for Pete was really just a hassle because he had to go all the way through the Prevost ramp and around onto Anki. And there, too, he would have to sit separate from everyone else. As you know, these problems aren't specific to Pete. You all have heard many other stories, like Chris was talking about, of the inadequate accessibility at the high school. So that's why we've come to so many of these meetings, and we'll continue to come and show our support for the infrastructure project in the future. So we ask you to think about all the positive and necessary changes this project will bring to people like Pete who may come in the future, and to everyone when you vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Is there more public comment? Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Tim Henkel, 462 Barclay Road, returning for the same reason, and to support that same project, the infrastructure improvement projects as it's now known, and just to point out, some of the things as we hopefully reach a threshold moment. Three things. My three things of the day: that this is a knowable project, that it's an understandable project, and that it's an available project. It's knowable in that the safety conditions are known. We know them. It's knowable in that the plans have been developed in full view of everyone, and the financing plan has been vetted and shown to everyone. It's understandable as the project's not too complicated. It's not so complex that we can't wrap our arms around it and figure it out. And maybe most importantly, it's understandable that it's not for some, it's for all. The project is also available. It's been available. The website is just overflowing with materials that have been composed over time. And so at this moment, there's no real reason not to vote for it. In fact, a vote against it is a vote against it. It's not a vote for lack of understanding, lack of knowing, or lack of availability. The information is there. You vote no, you don't believe in the project. Not you don't understand the project and need more information. But I've been reminded in the past week how hard it is actually to penetrate the public awareness, to make people aware of what's going on. And I do understand that the board has this burden of the unknown voices that are out there who won't show up potentially until there's a shovel in the ground, and they'll show up with pitchforks, not to help, but to say that the work hasn't been done, and that you haven't been diligent in your efforts to be as efficient and as wise with the spending of public dollars as you could be. And so today, in addition to my request that you vote, and vote in the direction that I'm supporting, but to know that we're still going to be here. It doesn't end for us, for any of the others who have come and supported this, and for many who will show up at a moment's notice were we all to ask, to support the efforts to communicate what this project always has been, what it will continue to be, and how it will be perfected over time, because there's a lot more left to be done to make it not just what it needs to be, but so special, and something that will be such a source of pride for this community. This isn't about me. It's not about my children. It's not about my deceased son. It's about the people who will benefit from this in the future. It's meaningful to us, but it should be meaningful to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim.
For the last couple of years.
Thank you. Do we have more public comment? Mr. Petiti, are there any email comments?
Yes, Mrs. Stern, I have two. First is from Mia Bloomfeld. Hello, and thank you for taking the time to read this email. I'm a mother of a swimmer. As we all know, our pool is in dire need for upgrading. I know as many high schools, swimming may not be the #1 sport for the RHS community, but is to our swimmers and swim parents. As many of us know that swimmers are strong, smart, and dedicated people that carry these traits with them long after they leave RHS. Swimmers go on to be very successful academically as well as successful adults. They need our support now. Our children spend many hours in the pool. Currently, the pool facility is dirty and outdated. The locker rooms are unfit and certainly do not reflect the quality of our school. They are not clean, cockroach infested, and full of mold and mildew. By now, my biggest concern are the chemical burns that cover my daughters and other swimmers' bodies. This is a health problem stemming from outdated equipment, poor water quality, and too many chemicals. The pumps and water filtration systems must be addressed. We not only have our children exposed to these hazardous conditions daily, but any other swimmer that enters our pool for meets, practice, and from the community that use the pool for community swim time. The pool is the most used sport facility in the township and the least updated. It is an asset for our school and community. We are proud to be in one of the best school districts in the state. Our pool certainly does not give that impression when you walk in the doors of our pool. I urge you to please update our pool. Our children need the support. The updates that could be made to the pool will serve RHS and the community for many years to come. Thank you. Happy holidays. The next is from Lon Record, a Radnor resident. Good evening. I'm sending this email in reference to the proposed ADA accessibility and wellness infrastructure project at Radnor High School. My wife and I are Radnor residents with 2 young boys who attend Radnor Elementary School. We have had the great pleasure of being involved with nearly every youth sport that Radnor has to offer as parents, coaches, and volunteers. Throughout our experience, we have had the opportunity to utilize the athletic facilities at Radnor High School on numerous occasions. This experience is shared with most, if not all, residents at some point in their youth sports journey in Radnor. The school district's willingness to work with and support youth sports in our township is unique and greatly appreciated by all. While we have some wonderful township facilities and fields for our young athletes to compete on, I would say that Radnor High School's fields and facilities are the epicenter of their youth sports experience and a focal point for our community. In addition to coaching in a few other programs, I recently took on the role of president of our Wayne Wildcats youth football organization. We have nearly 300 kids per year in our program, ranging in age from 6 to 13, that encompasses our tackle, cheer, and flag divisions. We have enjoyed a special relationship with the athletics department of Radnor High School that allows us to use many of the outdoor fields on campus, as does many other youth organizations in the township. I'm excited about the proposed future developments and would like to convey that these improvements will benefit many generations of Radnor boys and girls beyond the window of high school age. Thank you for your consideration of this measure, and thank you for your time and effort as board members.
Is that it? Thank you, Mr. Petiti. Oh, Dr. Winters, welcome.
Roberta Winters, and I understand clearly the accessibility issues that have been addressed for a year, and I also understand the importance of recreation and athletics in our township. And we also are operating today under an Act 1 index that may impact future educational options for all students. I also understand that the school facilities belong to the community. Radnor Township and all of its youth sports, private and parochial schools all have opportunities to use our facilities. At one point, many of these costs were shared. Has collaborative funding been explored for our future expenses? And as one commercial says, you really only need to pay for what you need. We hope this is the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winters. Is there more public comment? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move into report from board committees. We all met as a committee of the whole last week, so these will be kind of abbreviated since we all took part in these committee meetings last week. We'll get underway with the curriculum committee report. Ms. Solomon?
Yes, thank you. We did have a board meeting of the whole for the curriculum committee, so this will be a short synopsis. On your agenda tonight for consent are items from the curriculum committee, the school trips, hang on, I lost my place, I'm sorry. Where'd they go? Oh, here we go. Sorry, everyone. The school trips, the clubs, and then we heard the program of studies from the high school. And so those are the items from the curriculum committee. We will be discussing the calendar at the January curriculum committee meeting. I think it was said that it would be at this meeting, but we're going to take it up in committee in January. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. The facilities committee report.
Yeah, anyone who's interested in what we talked about the last facilities committee should go watch the very long and very in-depth conversation we had about the infrastructure project. And we also moved to put a new tractor with a snowblower on for this meeting. It's on the consent agenda. Thanks.
So for the finance committee portion of last week's meeting, we had a review and a discussion of the 18-19 audit report, as well as a fund balance allocation. We also acknowledged that we would be accepting the spring athletic bids tonight, and we had an acceptance of the financial reports. We also had a brief discussion about the DCIU board member representative from our board, which we will be voting on in our consent agenda tonight. And our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, January 7th at 2 p.m. That's an atypical time, but we're adjusting our schedule in January because of some conflicts during the month of January. Let's see, for our policy, no, GRCC did not meet in December, and for our policy committee on our consent agenda tonight, we have approval of a policy I think it's 201, it's on our consent agenda, and it is about admission of students. Okay, so with that, we will get right into our priority discussion action tonight, which is commitment of the 2018-2019 fund balance. Mrs. Deco?
I'm actually going to invite Mike Mood up from BB&D. He'll give a broad overview of the audit report, which will include some discussion, or will include discussion about the fund balance.
So this is actually going to be items 8.1 and 8.2 on your agendas, folks. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. All right, I understand that the meeting last week when Carl presented, everybody was present, so I'll keep it, brief. I'll not focus so much on the numbers and really just highlight the opinions and things of that nature. If that's
And
okay.
speak slowly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, not a problem, not a problem. It is a lengthy report, so I'm going to highlight just a few items. I think it's a 65-page document, but pages 1 and 2 is the independent auditor's report. Really what this does is outline the scope of the audit and identifies the opinion units for which we're going to issue an opinion. It also identifies management's responsibility, which is to prepare the financial statements in accordance with GAAP. It also indicates the auditor's responsibility, which is to express opinions on the opinion units, as well as conduct the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. And in that 2-page audit, independent auditor's report, it has our opinion, which was unmodified, or a clean opinion, meaning that the financial statements included in the report are presented in all material respects, or they're fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with GAAP. What I would indicate for new members of the board is to really focus on pages 3 through 14 of that audit report. That's the management's discussion and analysis. That's a good place to really find summarized, abbreviated information that management has identified as important, that really highlights a lot of the significant changes or events that occurred over the course of the year. So really just hone in on that if you have any questions or really want to find any information that you have questions about. With regard to the general fund, the fund balance increased for the 18-19 fiscal year by almost $1.5 million, bringing the cumulative fund balance to about $21.7 million. The commitments that were outlined that I guess you guys are going to have action on this evening represent commitments of about $6.6 million committed to future capital projects, about $2.6 million committed for technology and curriculum initiatives, about $3.5 million committed to future employer retirement rate stabilization related to the PSERS increased rates that have continued to rise over the past several years, and an additional $793,000 that's committed for the payment of future long-term portions of the early retirement incentive plans and compensated absences. That will leave just over $8 million, or 8% unassigned as it relates to the 1920 general fund expenditure budget, which is $100,986,944. So that 8% is within the guidelines prescribed by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So there's no issues with the ability to raise taxes or implement any budgetary restrictions as it relates to your unassigned fund balance. Beyond the management's discussion and analysis, pages 15 through 25 are your basic statements. There's further footnote disclosures in pages 26 through 49 that outline the school district's significant accounting policies, types of investments, pension and other post-employment benefit plans options, terms of your long-term debt, and a few more details related to your fixed asset balances. The notes are consistent with the prior year. The only change is there is a subsequent event disclosure. So as this audit report is for the year ended June 30, 2019, we did indicate in the subsequent events that as of last month you issued your general obligation bonds, Series B of 2019, which refunded some of the debt that's disclosed in this document related to your general obligation bonds for 2012, 2013, and 2015.
Mike, I want to interrupt you there for
Sure.
a second. So that's the reason when you read the audit and you see that we have outstanding bonds debt of $88 million, but the subsequent event, what page did you note that on?
The subsequent event disclosure is on page 49. It's the last page of the footnotes.
Okay, so that's where we really, our debt is actually not 88 million, it's 83 or 84, is that what that's about? Or just that we refunded it? You made the note
Just
that
that
we
you refunded it, so it's indicating that the debt was issued and it was refunded in order to currently refund your general obligation bonds 12, 13, and 15, and to pay for the costs related to issuance associated with that refunding transaction.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Beyond the notes, there's also a schedule of expenditures of federal awards on pages 57 and 58. That's really indicating that you had spent about $1.2 million in federal dollars. As a result, you had to have a single audit. Anytime you spend more than $750,000 in a fiscal year, a single audit is required. The major program that was audited in relation to that single audit was the Special Education Cluster, or IDEA. There was no findings to report. We did evaluate internal controls over compliance, and we issued an unmodified opinion on compliance, meaning that there was no issues that we found related to our evaluation. And the school districts complied as far as we audited that major program with every major program compliance requirement that was evaluated. So again, a clean opinion, no issues that we found, and everything, like I said, with the exception of that subsequent event note, was pretty consistent with the prior year.
Okay, so we did talk about this a little bit last week. Does anyone have any further questions? Alrighty, so the quick recap for the 30,000 foot is that we're doing well, the audit was clean, our fund balance went up by $1.48 million.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So at this time, I need to, for item 8.1, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the commitment of the 2018-2019 fund balance as presented in our agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, the motion passes 7-0 with Mr. Jubileer away from the podium. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And then for item 8.2, a request to accept the local audit report for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2019. I would entertain a motion to accept it as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? And the motion passes 7-0 with Mr. Jubileer absent from the podium. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We will be looking forward to a lot of financial workshops this year because it's a lot to ask brand new board members to accept an audit, about 2 weeks after they stepped onto the board. So we will provide lots of learning opportunities for that. But I do appreciate it, and I appreciate Mr. Moody being here tonight to walk us through that. And thankfully, and thank you, Mrs. Deco. I know that there's been a lot of work the last few months getting our audit report ready. So thank you for all that work there. All right, we're going to move into 8.3, our bond financing presentation. There will be no action on this tonight. We just wanted to bring our bond counsel and our bond people in tonight. The Finance Committee had a meeting back in June, where as a committee, we had a presentation of kind of the current status of our debt service, where our bonds are, and we were looking to understand what some possible scenarios could look like as we were contemplating this infrastructure project. And so we thought now would be a good time to bring the bond people in to speak to the entire board and answer any questions you may have tonight. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, you're lucky you get 2 finance presentations tonight.
Not everybody gets that lucky. So we have representatives from
the good news for
PFM,
everybody.
which is Public Financial Management, RBC Capital Markets, and Benning and Scattergood, all here tonight. Gentlemen, if you would introduce each of your,
Sure.
each other, that would be
So I'm
really great.
Zach Williard from PFM. We're the district's independent financial advisor, okay? And then with me is Mike Lillis from RBC, one of your bond underwriters, and Ed Murray from Benning and Scattergood, one of your bond underwriters. So collectively, we're the financing team, okay? So for the new board members, we contact you when we see refinancing opportunities, which we did earlier this year, and we'll quick glaze over that. And then you contact us when you're thinking about new projects and, how are you going to fund them, okay? And again, taking just a step back in general, typically in Pennsylvania, school districts fund capital projects 2 ways. One is you can pay cash, okay? Now, these projects that we're considering are very large, and typically, once you move out of a $1 million or a few $1 million, you kind of get into what the most common way to finance projects is, which is you go borrow proceeds through a bond issue, all right? So that's what we're here to talk about. As Susan said, we're not looking for anything tonight. The point of this is just to be informational. So please ask questions, because I'd be surprised if anyone was familiar with any of this. That would shock me. So that's the point tonight, is to be informational. So if you flip to page 1, and maybe I'll let either Mike or Ed talk about this page, but this is an interest rate chart.
Hang on, Zach, just a
Yes.
second. Could I ask if you have an
Okay,
extra
so we'll-
presentation, if you could maybe put it on the table, and then if I could ask, or even, up on the screen, and then that could be projected to the audience at home while you walk this through.
Okay. I don't think we have a PowerPoint. There is.
No, there is extra copies. Yeah, so there is extra copies in the back, and it is now posted on board docs,
Okay.
I believe. Michelle? It is. So this document is posted on board docs for public to see, and it is, copies are available here for anyone in attendance at the meeting as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's, if you lay it on the table, then our great tech people in the back can perhaps display it for home while you speak.
I had no idea that's what you meant.
Your face is lovely, but people might find this, and if you get it right in the middle there, he can zoom in, and
All right.
great. Thank you very much.
That's the first time I've done that before.
We're very high-tech here.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Zach.
So Ed or Mike, I don't know if you want to comment on interest rates.
Well, just generally, so,
And if you could speak closer to the microphone so that
so as you can see with the little red boxes on the top one, it's important to note that the historic low that we hit in 2016 was breached about 3.5 weeks ago. And what we would say to that was interest rates are now, or have been, right around their 62-year low. So you have to go back before the Kennedy administration to see when interest rates were actually lower than they currently sit today. So that's a long time. So, and if we look inside of the box, it's never been 25 basis points or a quarter point. It's never been a quarter point lower for any more than a week ever over the last 150 years. So we are at historic lows as far as, it's not a good time to be a saver. It's a great time to be a borrower.
And somehow we do tell you that every time we're here, the word historic lows.
You and I have spent more time together in the last 6
it's
years where
true.
you and I have had this conversation for
I mean,
6 years.
Every time we come here, we're at the bottom of one of that, on that graph somewhere. So it's
Great,
good news.
my 6 years on the board, this is what
We're
it's
gonna
been.
be wrong at some point.
No, it's fine with me if we're always right about this.
Yeah, it's good news. Rates are at all-time lows. All right, so this page will never look big, but we'll put it there anyway. This is your existing debt, okay? So this page is important because if you look at all these different columns, all right, there are all these different series of bonds that if you trace them back, they all funded some project in the past. But the important point for tonight's presentation is if you scroll all the way to the right, okay, when the column 16 where it says total debt service, when you add up all these different bond issues, they're kind of like pieces of the puzzle that then funnel into Michelle's budget at the end of the year. And if you look in column 16, you can see that, roughly ballpark, you're paying about $6.5 million per year in debt service as part of your budget, okay? Now, your debt expires, pays off in 2035. In PA school district world, that is very short debt, okay, very short. What that does is it allows you the opportunity that when you're going to have new projects, is you have the ability to wrap the new debt around the old debt. And we'll show you what that means because it's hard to visualize.
Zach, so
Yes.
I want to, make sure we take this a step at a time. So what this paperwork is showing is that if we borrowed no more money and we just kept making our bond payments, in 15 years, we would owe...
Debt-free.
We would be debt-free, which is virtually unheard of for a school, virtually unheard of for a school district or a government entity, correct?
Correct.
All right.
So-
And right now, our principal, am I reading that correctly? Our principal is actually under 80 million right now?
Correct. So the principal is, if
Okay.
you scroll down column 16 all the way to the bottom, right above the Radnor symbol in the gray box, you see $79 million. That's the debt outstanding. So that's like the mortgage, so to speak, without the interest on it.
And this is the, at June 30 in our audit report, it said we were 88 million, but we dropped down 8 million, 9 million?
Well, I'm not sure about the audit report, but you did make payments this year.
Correct.
That would,
So we
would
dropped
have
down
brought that
significantly,
Yeah.
even since the audit report we accepted, 2.5 minutes ago. Okay, just
Exactly.
trying to give people
Yep.
the framework for where we're sitting with our debt.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, very good. And so also, about this short debt is the district has what's called a AA1 credit rating from Moody's. So that's one notch below AAA, which is the highest rating. There's very few school districts in PA that have a AAA rating. But that very high credit rating allows you to borrow at very low interest rates. That's allowed us to refinance the debt numerous times and save a lot of money. And part of the reason is they cite that the district does have a low debt burden as far as PA school districts go. All right? So we'll flip to the next page.
Wait, I have a question about the last.
Yes.
So you have two streams here. You have the debt service requirements at the top, and then you have the local effort requirements?
Good point.
What?
We glazed over that. So the top half of this is your gross debt service, so that's principal and interest, okay? The bottom half is net of the reimbursement that you get on some of your bond issues. So in column 32, when you compare that up to column 16, you can see that the payments are lower. Now, Radnor does not receive very much state reimbursement, but you do receive some, and that's reflected in the budget that Michelle puts together. But so that's what the bottom half of this page shows you is the net local effort.
Right, so we basically get about $1 million, a little over, maybe $1.7 million in reimbursements over the life of these, over the 15 years that we still owe money. Over that 15 years, we'll get about $1.7 million from the state to help with these payments. Not a very big effort from the state.
Yeah, this is the Plan Con. If you've ever heard of Plan Con, that's what this is. And it's usually very confusing when you hear about Plan Con, but that's what that reflects. Okay, so if we flip to page 4, real briefly, this is what we just completed. All right, in calendar year 2019, it was a 3-step refinancing plan. I don't know, Mike, if you want to run through what we did there.
Yeah. So as Zach mentioned, the district did 3 refinancings this year, and we broke them up into different pieces, which enabled us to get more savings. Good.
Way higher than we expected.
Oh, yeah, yeah, which we were all glad about, obviously. So if you look in columns 7, 8, and 9, that shows the amount of debt service savings that was realized in each year. And then if you go to column 10, that shows the total of all 3 issues, all refinancings. And at the very bottom, you'll see that you saved almost $2.2 million, which is pretty good savings.
Yeah, that plan worked real well. And in column 10, you see the savings is a little strange in the years to where we hit that. That was strategic, believe it or not. There was a reason to that. And it was to level out your existing local effort in column 6 to the left here, okay? Because we knew that there could be projects coming in the future. The district chose to make the best use of that savings over the life of your existing debt rather than taking it all up front, for example, in the form of a 1-year budgetary savings. You took it over the life.
Right, now, so just, again, and I'm doing a little bit of this just to give new board members. We did a refunding a year and a half ago or so, maybe 2 years ago, where we front-ended. We took like $1 million savings in the first year. Is that, if I'm remembering correctly? Yeah, one of the 14s
I think
we did.
It might have been a combination of some up front, but then still taking some.
Correct,
over
but
the
it was
life.
like so in this case, we've spread that $2 million out a little bit more evenly.
Right.
Front-ended some of it, but, so, different strategies you guys can do in our refunding to optimize how it helps us.
Exactly.
Okay.
We always work with Michelle, and the administration to figure out the best use of the savings. So when you look in column 11, your new debt service, new local effort after the refinancings, you can see it's pretty level. That was because of the way we took savings. You have two kind of peaks out in the long years, which we weren't able to fix through that refinancings, but that was the strategy there. So kind of thinking forward, thinking that you might have some new projects coming, that was how we took the savings. Now, columns 6 and 7, you can read in detail tonight if you can't go to sleep. I think we're just going to hit on a couple of these, all right? Now, when you're looking at funding new projects, there's kind of different ways under bullet 1 that you can finance it. You can finance them once you get bids back. You can borrow some of the money beforehand.
Which page are you on now?
I'm sorry, on page 6.
Yeah, okay, so we moved over to 6, thanks.
So there's a current funding, that's where you wait for construction bids. There's advanced funding where you borrow all the money ahead of time. And then, typically, once you get above $10 million, it makes a lot of sense for PA school districts to look at multiple financings. And that strategy sometimes consists of borrowing a little bit of the money before you get bids back. And then you wait until you get bids back so you know what the final amount that you really need is. And then you can go out and borrow what we call cleanup issue and borrow the appropriate amount once you have the bids in and once you've kind of worked through some of the construction schedule. Okay, so that's just some kind of bonds 101, and we'll work with you to figure out the best way to do that. Item 2, reimbursement resolution. I think we talked about this in June, but a lot of times we suggest to our clients that you do this. It's a no harm, no foul, one-page resolution that then allows the district to reimburse itself for any startup costs that you've incurred as you gear up for this type of project. Okay, so at some point, if you would like to do that, we would suggest doing that. It doesn't hurt you, and it's just a belt and suspenders way to reimburse yourself in the future if you want to. Not required to.
But just to clarify, I mean, we could reimburse ourselves for the feasibility study that was
Correct.
done. We can reimburse ourselves for all the architect's fees we've incurred and engineering fees, et cetera. So
Exactly.
far. Okay.
All right, the main point in item 3 is that when you get ready to borrow money, you want to make sure that you can spend 85% of it within 3 years. All right, and I'll leave it at that. Now, if you're working with an architect and going through all the proper channels, that's usually not a concern, but just something that we want to point out. And
Let me just ask you something, Zach, real quick. The point of the Internal Revenue Code permits the issuer to borrow funds at a tax-exempt interest rate. There's no particular impact to us as a school district for that, but you have it underlined.
Well, so the district is able to borrow, when we talk about the bond issues that we're going to talk about and when we've done these refinancings, all of those are done on a tax-exempt basis, meaning the interest rates are lower than, how other people can go out and borrow taxable. All right. In order to keep your bonds tax exempt, you need to follow all the IRS guidelines.
But effectively, the point I'm getting at is that when you say tax exempt, for us, that really just means at a lower rate.
Yes.
In order to keep our bond rate at a lower rate, we have to do these federal tax law
Right.
1, 2, and 3.
And it just means status quo. That's how you would do it anyway.
Exactly. Thank you.
So item 4 there, just another kind of important bond 101 item is, the state does have a limit on how much school districts can borrow. It's based on a formula, all right? So what we did was in here we put what the remaining borrowing capacity of Radnor is, and that is, about $124 million. Now, that's not a suggestion to borrow $124 million. It's simply just the legal limit. You still have to pay for the debt, and we're going to show you that here just in a second. And then real briefly on the next page, we have the maximum parameters resolution. That's how we've done the last half a dozen bond issues at the district. In today's choppy interest rate market, that's pretty much the standard. But what it does is it allows the financing team to get all the proper approvals ahead of time so that we can actually price the bonds. Mike and Ed can lock in the interest rates on an appropriate day and not be tied to a regularly scheduled board meeting. Because when you go back and look at that interest rate chart, if it's a bad day in the market, you don't want to have to price the bonds that day. So that's kind of the new, when I say new, the last 10 years since the recession, that's how you price debt. So, we would probably move forward with that type of resolution again. And lastly, for those of you who've been around, you've heard us talk a lot about bank-qualified bonds in the past. And what that means is if you issue $10 million or under per calendar year, so calendar year, not fiscal year, you receive better interest rates typically and a more advantageous call feature. So when possible, it's oftentimes, in the district's advantage to issue bank-qualified debt. All right, so that'll also be part of the financing strategy should you move forward with these projects, as we'll evaluate, does it make sense to try to break this into a multi-step borrowing plan in order to take advantage of bank-qualified bonds. I don't know if you gentlemen have anything to add to that.
No, that's pretty good. Just one thing that Zach had mentioned that some of you may not be familiar with is a call provision. Basically, that means when you a call provision, and say for a bank-qualified issue, is typically 5 years, which means you can refinance in 5 years. For issues larger than that, the call provision is longer, typically 7, 8, or sometimes 10 years. So that's one of the benefits that Zach was referring to if you look at issuing 10 million or less in a calendar year.
And that 5-year call feature is what's allowed us to do all of these refinancings that the district's been able to do over the past few years. It's not really a quantifiable advantage, but it's something that you never know when rates are going to be lower, and that's been the case for the last 12 years. So, okay, so the next 2 pages look wild. We're going to walk through those 2 in detail. We have 2 scenarios in here. One is for if you borrow $24 million. The second one is if you borrow $28 million. So we'll kind of go through $24 million in a little more detail so you get the spirit of what all these columns are, and then you can just flip to the $28 million and kind of understand the gist of it. So on page 9, there's 4 options. Okay, each one of these.
Falling asleep.
Yeah, each one of these options is going to end up netting the district $24 million for future capital projects. Okay, so starting in column 6, you see your existing debt. Now that's important again because what we're going to show you in option 1 is called a wraparound debt service structure. So the wraparound structure, if you look in column 7, assumes that you have very small principal payments all the way down through the final maturity of your existing debt. So you can see you pay about $900,000 a year. And then in 2035, as your existing debt, right in column 6, pays off, the new payments are going to jump up to be about the $6.5 million or so that's leaving, okay? So that's what's wrapping around your debt. You have to kind of look at it as like 2 pieces of a puzzle. So that at the end of the day, on the right in column 8, what Michelle's actually putting in the budget is it's going to be level at about $7.4 million, let's call it, over the next 19 years, all right? The purpose of a wraparound structure, and this is the most common way in Pennsylvania that school districts, boroughs, townships, cities, counties fund projects, is it has the lowest overall budgetary impact because you're wrapping around the debt, all right? So you're going to have the lowest budgetary impact. You may pay a little more interest over the life, and that's part of what this analysis is going to show you. But the main advantage is you pay less upfront, less hit to your budget, okay? So again, when you look in column 8, let's call it $7.4 million would be your new annual debt service, and that would extend your current debt about 3 years, all right? The next 3 scenarios are kind of a more of a plain vanilla approach where in the red, in option 2, this is a 20-year level payment structure. So in column 9, every year the payments are level. There's no wraparound to it. So when you add column 9 and column 6 together, that's what column 10 is showing you. Shows you what your new annual budgeted payments are. And what you can see is your payments, instead of being about $7.4 million, are going to be about $8.1 million. And that's because we're just having generic level payments that are just going to lay right on top of your existing debt. So it's going to hit your budget harder than the wrap scenario. All right. So then option 3 is kind of just a little bit longer of a level payment structure. So instead of 20 years, it's 25 years. So you can see in column 11, the payments are a little bit lower than they were in the red. But again, it has the same impact as when you layer it on top of your existing debt. You're still going to be at about a $7.9 million annual payment until about 2036. And then your existing debt will pay off, and then your payments will drop down a little bit. So again, the pro and con versus the wrap is you're just going to have much higher annual budgetary impact if you were to go with a level structure. And then finally, in the purple, 30 years is typically the max that school districts would issue debt. Same concept in column 13, level payments. Now the payments are going to go down because you're stretching it out 5 years again versus the green, and then you layer it on top of your existing debt. That'll have the most similar payment structure to the blue, to the wrap, because the payments are lower, about $7.8 million. So again, the concept here is the wraparound is going to have the lowest budgetary impact, and because your existing debt is so short, by debt standards, there's a lot of value in the wraparound. If you had 25-year existing debt, doing a wraparound way out 25 years, that sometimes doesn't carry near as much value. But because Radnor's debt is short in column 6, there is value in the wraparound structure. So we'll pause for questions from you. Thoughts?
Just
Bradley, do you have any questions?
Yes, I wanted to clarify something that Ms. Stern asked about when the auditors were here, and sorry, we will let them leave, so I'm putting you on the spot. When you presented this to a similar proposal to the Finance Committee in June 2019, that presentation also said that there was $83 million in outstanding debt. But the auditor's report says that there is $88 million as of June 2019 in outstanding debt. So I'm wondering, where are you pulling your numbers from so that they're different from what the auditors had in their report? Because it looks like you have the same outstanding total debt number of about $83 million, both in your June presentation to the Finance Committee and what you're presenting now.
Sure, so good question. So I'm not sure I'm going to totally be able to answer that question at the moment. On page 2, going backwards to that debt summary, okay, we're lining up all of the district's general obligation bond issues. I don't know if the district, Michelle, do you have any leases or anything that would be in part of that number?
There are leases for computer equipment and things like that that are included in that debt number. So we have computer equipment, we have iPads, all kinds of things where we actually lease that as well, and that's part of what's included in the audit report.
Okay, so just to follow up, it's not necessarily the case that recent refinancings that we did took our principal down by $5 million. We've been pretty consistent since.
Yeah, so the refinancings, typically when you do refinancings, they don't lower the principal amount. What they do is they lower the debt service amount. It's kind of think home mortgage. When you refinance the mortgage, you're still going to have that same outstanding principal amount of the mortgage, but you're simply taking the old rate of a 5% and lowering it to a rate of a 4%, and that's what generates the savings. So when we talk savings, and that page where we showed you the 2.2 million of savings, that was 2.2 million in interest savings, not in principal savings. Does that help?
You know what may be a factor too? Tell me what you guys think, is that if the audit's as of June 30, 2019, this is as of June 30, 2020, I wonder if the lopping off one fiscal year is the reason for the difference.
Yeah, well, plus which, because even if you look at our page 2 that you brought us, that number's down to the 79. So the principal is down to 79 million.
You make principal payments on each one of these debt obligations at least once a year. A number of these have different payments. So in theory, you could have made, usually you make payments either on the 1st or 15th of the month. So since June, you could have made payments on half of this debt that would lower the principal amount versus the June number. So there's a couple different factors of why that number.
I think that's probably it. I think Mike's right.
Maybe a combination of both. Huh?
I think it's a combination of both. I think what you're identifying is correct. I think if you look here, it says, year ending 2020. So this is the next fiscal year. And if you look at the annual payments, they're about 6.5 million. So if you said part of that's interest, part of it's principal, let's say it's half and half. If you took $3 or $4 million worth of principal and then the leases, that's the difference between the two, most likely.
And I had a follow-up question about the interest savings we got by the refinancings. When you presented in June, you had realized about, I think it was something about $1 million in savings, and then it's up to 2.2 or so now. Was that extra 1.2 something you had anticipated in June, and you were continuing to execute a plan that led to that, or was there, or had conditions changed that led to the additional savings?
We did execute one more refunding that we executed in October, and the savings, interest rates really bottomed out, right there in the middle of October, and we really hit that 62-year low right on the noggin. We were hoping the savings was going to be around $900,000. It wound up being $1.3 million something.
Yeah, $1 million. On page 4, you can see step 3 was $1.3 million of the total 2.2. So that was the big piece of it.
Sorry, Bradley, just to follow up, I think that we gave you parameters to do that third number, and then you came back to us with even, am I remembering this correctly? We gave you parameters to save about 2.5%, and then you came back to us because you thought you could save us even more, but even the 2.5 was far exceeded. That third column is 7.3%. I mean, it just must have been a crazy advantageous day for us.
It was good timing.
We always say the same thing.
Come close.
Again, it's a combination of two things. As Zach pointed out, we ask you to do the parameters resolution so we're in a position to execute. And in that case, interest rates just precipitously went down. You were nowhere near a meeting structure, but since we had the parameters resolution in place, we were able to, with the superintendent and the business office, execute, and we really did. That's that's the highlight, case study for why you do that, because it saved hundreds of thousands of dollars more right after that. So,
Yeah.
yes.
But good questions, yeah.
And are we done? Are there more refinancings that are available to
We're
us,
done
or have we pretty much tapped that?
We're done for now, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. And one last question. You talked about the AA1 rating. Historically, what does that look like in Radnor, to your knowledge? Is this something we've had for a long time? Is it recent? What's the history there?
It was just upgraded
14. In 2014, you were upgraded from a AA2 one notch to a AA1. And as I said, AA1 is slim company. It's very, very high rating. And that reflects real well on the, financial performance of the district, the economy, a lot of factors, but it's all a good story.
And what kinds of things would happen? What would it look like for it to go to an AA2? What kinds of things would lead to that going back down?
Spending of fund balance would be the easiest metric to look at. The district has a good fund balance, and Moody's and Wall Street view that very favorably. That's how you get the very low rates that you get when we go out to borrow. And that would probably be the first factor they would look at to downgrade the district, is if they saw what they would view as material spend in the district's reserves.
Thank you.
Yeah. So they have a scorecard, and there's about 7 different things in their methodology, and they'll tell you what their methodology is. And as Zach pointed out, spending and what they like to look at are trends, right? If you spend your fund balance one time because you have an extraordinary event, they don't come downgrade you, right? But if you're spending down fund balance year over year, it looks like you haven't put your expenditures and revenues in alignment. They get concerned because they see that can go quickly badly. It was more about the trend. What is your trend in assessed valuation? Is it going up or is it going down? What is your trend in fund balance? Do you maintain or increase your fund balance, or do you spend your fund balance down?
And I think a big reason for the upgrade that the district received is that if you look at past years of revenues and expenditures, the district's fund balance was increasing over several years. So I think it got to the level it is now about 3 years ago or something like that. But that was, so to Ed's point, that was a positive trend.
What we'll do, we'll send Michelle the last rating report, and that way the new board members could take a read.
I think we actually got it in our
Okay.
packets from
Okay, good.
2014.
That's not the last rating package. What you received, you had 2 additional documents in your packet over and above this one from PFM. You have the report from 2014 for Moody's, which is when we went to a AA1 rating. And then you have a 1-page document which mentions all the things that Ed had brought up about how Moody's rates you from a AA1 and a AA2. And that is from 2016, December of 2016. You'll see it on the top.
Great,
So we'll send the 2019 one, then you can.
Great, thank
read
you.
it.
Are there other questions, Nancy?
I just had more of a clarification, and I think you covered it already. As of now, we have debt going 15 years out. The standard, kind of what you would see maximum that a school district would go out for, you said 50?
30.
30.
Yeah.
Okay.
That means almost 2050.
Oh,
That's
good.
only 30 years. We
Okay,
looked at the
so
schedule.
to 2050. Okay. All right, that was, I just wanted to clarify.
Buildings. So typically buildings, bricks and mortar, they'll refer to it as a useful life of at least 30 years. But usually, that's why you won't see districts going past that because, well, I think 30 years is probably being conservative enough. But.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Liz, do you have any questions? Just turn your mic on, Liz.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
What percentage of the fund, of your overall budget is Moody's looking for our fund balance? Is there a best practices out there?
They're going to tell you, and again, in the report, it will tell you things that would make the rating go up, things that would make the rating go down, and it highlights the things that they like. And I don't think there's much they don't like, but it would tell you normally. There's not a perfect, because there's so many factors they use to rate a district. There's not one item under fund balance or one item under debt that they're going to say would make the rating move. They just don't do that. They like to view the district as a whole. But again, just the three of us have done this for a while, and we know that that's usually the first item that they'll peek at. As Ed said, is a trend where you're spending cash without a remedy in place. That's usually the first alarm bell that goes off for them. I don't know if Ed and Mike have anything to add to that.
I'll just say anecdotally, Zach put together today, really quick, some research on the other AA1 and AA2 school districts in Pennsylvania, and we can get this over to you. And it kind of says, what is your total direct debt? What is your debt service as a percentage of your expenditures? And then what is it, the general fund balance, percentage of general fund balance to total expenditures? So you can kind of take a look at that. So Moody's won't tell you, but you can compare yourself to other high-performing districts. Is our fund balance, is our total debt service, annual debt service, high or low? We don't really say yes or no, but we'll show you what you look like compared to all the other AA1 and AA2s. I think all the metrics that we would look at to compare you to everyone is very favorable. I think debt service as a percentage of budget is much higher, and a lot of those, you're at the very low end of what is my expenditure of debt service to my total budget.
Thank you.
I guess just to follow up with that, what is our current percentage of our debt service to our budget is what right now? Maybe it's a question for Michelle.
Debt service to expenditure? You got the other one.
So I actually have a slide on this that, do you want me to go to the slide and I can show? Or do you want me just to?
Hang on, Michelle, let's just, does anybody else have specific questions for this sheet? Yeah.
Okay, so I can address that question.
Yeah,
relatively
we'll come
quick.
back to that.
Okay.
Yep, we're going to come back to that. Does anyone else have questions for Mike or Zach or?
If I could. Oh.
Andrew, go ahead.
Just quick, just because we're on this topic, I kind of want to move out from the micro to the maybe middle level here, just kind of zoom out. So kind of going back to what, Zach, you were saying earlier about, you were referring to page 9, and you were saying that 15-year debt horizon, so to speak, allows us to have a pretty favorable debt servicing plan. And then I'm just trying to kind of gather some thoughts here and kind of summarize a little bit.
Sure.
So, and again, I don't have a background in this, so I'm just, kind of making sense of it. So, given our rating and given the historic situation, although as we've talked about before, so given all these factors, it seems, given our fiscal situation, given the historic lows with interest rates, you're basically saying that this is not going to, I think the burning question is this going to affect our rating? And how are we going to be able to do this in a way that keeps us at the same sort of rating level?
I would feel comfortable saying that all else being equal with the finances of the district, fund balance included, if you were to go out and borrow $20 or $25 million, that would not have any material impact on the rating. Now, I can't speak for Moody's.
Yeah, sure.
But, given that they view your debt as moderate to low, I don't think that this would send off any alarm bells.
So it could look like something, maybe take out, I'm making this up, but, 2 bank-qualified loans, 10 million, something like that. I mean, there are different ways to do this, obviously.
Right. Yeah, so we're still on page 9, and we don't have to go through the next page in detail because I know you have a lot more to do, but the next page, this assumes, this blue, red, green, and purple all assume that you would go out and borrow $24 million all at once. In this scenario, it assumes you're doing this in March of next year. We know that's not happening, okay? All this debt would then hit your budget all at once if you borrow it, $24 million all in March, okay? So this is kind of a 30,000-foot view ballpark of what kind of impact does $24 million have on your budget, That's what this page is meant to show you. This is not our recommended borrowing plan, so to speak, yeah. The next page takes that wraparound structure in the blue and kind of breaks it down into more of a thoughtful process of how would you get the 24 million over the next 3 years, okay? Because we know there's still a lot of legwork that you have to do with your architect, and even if you had all that in place, you're not going to need $24 million on day one. You know, you're going to spend that over 12 or 18 or 20 months, depending on how it goes. So some of this, you know, what we would do going into the future is the financing team works with your architect to figure out what the spend schedule is going to be. You know, we look at the markets, and we kind of put together a more thoughtful plan that would break this borrowing out over, here it shows 3 steps, maybe it's only 2, depending on the schedule. You might have one non-bank qualified issue in there if it makes sense. But that would be, just so you understand, that would be the process that we'd work through with you and the administration in order to get the right answer for how do we get 24 million or whatever the number is for the projects.
So I actually have a question, and this, I appreciate you pointing that out, because that answers, I think it starts to answer my question, because on page 7, it states that we can't issue more than $10 million of bank-qualified bonds per calendar year. So we've missed the window for 2019. We're going to have to borrow, if we start borrowing in 2020. But if we borrow in 2020 in March, 10 million, if we need to borrow again in 2020, or we want to borrow again in 2020, that second, not borrow, issue bonds, sorry. It feels like borrowing, but I.
No, it is. Yeah,
okay.
It is, yeah.
If we want to issue another set of bonds in 2020, those won't be bank qualified because we'll have hit the $10 million limit. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
But we could, I mean, if we saw interest rates on the rise and we said we don't want to wait till 2021 because we're concerned about how much more it would cost, or we needed the money for some other purpose, we still had the option to issue in 2021 or in 2020. Is there a significant difference in the rates between the bank qualified and the non-bank qualified?
Well,
you don't want to get into that?
Well, no. So right now we're assuming there's a 0.25% difference. That changes every day. Okay?
Yeah.
So just for ballpark assumptions, that's what this assumes. So you save a 0.25%.
Okay.
All right. Now, can you issue later that year? As that's a little bit of a stickier question. We'd have to work through with your bond counsel. You know, we typically try to, before we go through with something like this, we try to be very thoughtful about what's on the horizon.
Okay.
And make a best guess or best decision, I guess, a best decision that you're not going to need to issue anymore. You know, we can look at your other debt and decide if you have a refinancing that might be coming down the road and kind of develop that's why all these schedules, you know, think out multiple years, because you kind of have to think about these things as a whole. Right. In order to make sure you get the.
And I'm not, I mean, I know full well we're not going to run out of money because there's, you know, we have a capital projects fund, we have a general fund. I mean, the same reason we have a good rating from Moody's. We've got the money there. We just think it's more prudent to borrow it. So I was just trying to make sure that if we saw things on the rise and we want to make sure we still had the rest of the project covered, there's a way to cover it. Okay.
Yeah, we'll help think through that with you.
Okay. Okay, and you answered my other question about the bonding. Can I just get one clarification? On page 9, the blue column says that it's 19 years. I'm just wondering if that's actually 18 years.
Yes.
Okay.
That does look like 18 years to me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that Lydia?
So I just need to point out, first of all, this is fantastic the way you're walking us through this. I just received this a few minutes before this meeting started. There's a lot in here. I did go back and listen to the June meeting, but this is the first time the full board has seen this. So just to look at the different options, you know, to me, it's something that I need to think about. So I'm just putting that out there. We're just now getting this. So my question is, and maybe you said this or this was told to us before, but what are your fees, all of your different agencies, for doing this work? Are you on like a retainer for us, or do you charge a fee when we go borrow, or how does this work?
Our fees are contingent on when you issue debt. So, you know, we kind of, like a plan like this, for example, you know, we'll work through something like this over multiple years. You know, if you don't move forward with the project, you know, you don't pay us anything. That's kind of just part of our arrangement. You know, we help the district with lots of different kind of things throughout the year. But then once there is a transaction, our fees are paid out of the transaction at settlement. And you don't come out of, the state allows you to pay the fees out of the borrowing if you choose to, not out of general fund cash.
So what are your fees? Is it to different organizations? You're not all with the same?
There's 3 different organizations.
3 different organizations. So can you just tell me roughly what your fees are?
So our fees are generally a percentage. So the underwriters, Michael and ourselves, and myself, we work as a percentage of the par value of whatever you're borrowing. I can't remember what the last one was? 6. So our fee in the last one, the 2019 bond issue that we just did, the 2019 Bs, was 0.65%. Oh, and we share it.
With who? With the 2 of you?
Yeah.
And then your fee is separate?
My fee is typically a flat fee. It's not tied to the borrowing. I don't know what the fee would be, you know. I have not quoted a fee, for this future borrowing.
We can do that.
Well, what does it typically, I mean, I'm just trying to ask, is this something,
Yeah.
I like all of you, and you come and you do great work, but should we be looking around to cut our
I think on the last
fees?
transaction, we, for the $14 million borrowing, I think we were around $35,000.
Okay.
For the third step.
So, I mean, I just know when you do your home mortgage, you always ask about the fees, because you know that's where they make their money, so. Okay, that's my question for now, thanks.
All right, great. Again, thank you all. I think this has been really very informative tonight, the presentation. I really appreciate it.
Good. Ms. Stern, I have just one more question.
Oh, sure.
If you have time.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I wanted to go back. This follows up on something that Ms. Dunn asked. When you presented to us in June, you actually had a kind of a different option compared to what you have on page 10 now with a 3-step borrowing plan. The presentation in June was for $20 million of borrowing instead of $24 million of borrowing. So if we decide we want a $20 million project instead of a $24 million project, or if we determine that we've built up capital reserves that allow us to use funds we already have, and we only want to borrow $20 million still for a $24 million project, how fresh is the proposal that you made in June 2019 for 2 bank-qualified loans, one in March 2020, one in March 2021? Would you need a lot of updating to show us what it looks like to do $20 million of borrowing under that plan?
So just to be clear, so we try not to call these proposals. It's more just estimated numbers, scenarios. Yeah, at the time, I think that the information was to run scenarios for about 20 million. We updated those with, this is 24. On the next 2 pages is 28, so you can look at that, at your leisure. But we can go back to 20 million. Ultimately, the size of the project's determined by you all. You let us know, and then we'll show you borrowing scenarios for whatever that dollar figure is. And you made a good point in that, we're showing you a $24 million borrowing here, okay? And let's say you pick the $24 million project. You can then come back and say, financing team, we'd like to use $1 million of our reserves as well as borrow money. And then what we'll do is tailor a plan around some type of cash contribution from the district, and then going out to borrow the rest of it. So those are still kind of the things that, these pages, you'll see these over and over again. This is a fluid process that's going to change, all the way until the final step is issued, as we, work through whatever the goals are.
Just to give you some idea, I finished a financing yesterday for a school district, and I would note that it was on my computer version number 32. So
yeah.
Cash, no cash, you're going to say, take the wraparound, don't do an extreme wraparound, push it down. There's virtually an unlimited amount of structuring that you can do. Zach gave you 3. He could have put 34 up there. We'll do almost anything that you can as long as we have this dialogue. We know what your goals are. What is the goal that you're seeking to get to? And we'll work around that. If you say, listen, I think we want to put in $4 million worth of cash and only do 2, on Zach's page 10, just take the first 2 columns and don't think about the third. It's basically updated for a $20 million 2 bond issue wraparound starting in March of 2020.
Right.
So they can still use, I think the question was, that June presentation that you gave us, which we then recirculated with the board, I think both in October and November, which, you know, it's very similar pages, but it was just for the bank qualified for the 20 million, is still a worthy scenario to
Sure.
be looking at as the board is trying, yes.
Yeah.
So the process, you know, just, and again, thank you, and, you know, we can spend a few minutes looking at the second option of the 28 million, but it's the same principles. I mean, what they're doing is providing us with scenarios where, you know, and basically the upshot of this is we are in a good debt service scenario now. Money is at historic lows to borrow, and we have tasked these guys over the last 6 years with finding us some huge cost savings, and we will continue to task them, you know, depending on how we vote tonight and moving forward. You know, we will task them with this work, and they've done well for us before. I have every expectation they would do well for us again, whatever the bond market happens to be when those times come. You know, and largely what would happen is they will come to a finance committee meeting, and we'll do the drill down in a finance meeting with the finance committee members if anybody wants to, you know, change their mind and join the finance committee. You know, and then they'll make a recommendation to us at that time, depending on the conditions of the market. So that's, you know, that's what the intention of this is to illustrate how it's workable. And you know, and actually Michelle has a little bit, some historic perspective here. So if we want to spend a few minutes and just kind of take a quick look at what 28 million would look like.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you know, just so everybody understands, it will be for us to ultimately kind of pull the trigger. Is it going to be 10 million, 20 million, 24, 29, you know, whatever the triggers are, whatever the levers are, the process will be the same. This is what the paperwork's going to look like. The work they'll do would be to find us the most favorable market, and when it's time to pull the trigger, we pull the trigger. We'll give them parameters so that they can even fine-tune that trigger to get us the best possible scenario. So why don't you quickly go over 28 million, and
Yep.
then we're going to let Michelle give some background.
Okay.
Thank you, Zach.
All right, so page 12, so again, as Susan said, it's the same spirit of the other page, except here we're doing 28 million, okay? So you can see in column 7, the payments are going to go up to, you know, it increases your future budget by about, you know, $1 million, let's call it, whereas the other page, your payments went up about 900,000. So it's about a $100,000 difference to borrow the additional $4 million for the project, is how I'd summarize what this page is showing you, okay? And again, these pages are just meant to get you all in the ballpark for budgetary impact so that then you can decide, as you said, whether it's 26, 25, 29, 31, you know, whatever the numbers are. That,
Right.
yeah, that's kind of where this is meant to get you to as far as the decision points made. And then again, we have the same 20, 25, and 30-year structures. You know, we're happy to do that. You know, I just think that given your debt, your existing debt, that, you know, wraparound probably will yield the best kind of fiscal result, call it. So I think that's all for those pages.
Right, and again, we're not asking for action tonight. This was meant to be
Yes.
informational. So if we don't have any more questions for these gentlemen, Michelle, I know that you have a little bit more in terms of financial background you want to give us. Thank you all very
All right,
much.
yeah,
We
thank
look forward-
you.
We look forward to working with you.
Great.
Thanks.
So since I came to the district in 2014, that's when the district originally undertook the general obligation debt refunding plan. There were multiple debt general obligation bonds that we refunded. It was not new money, so I want just that everyone to be clear on that. And I think Zach probably remembers better than me, but I think we've refunded 9 or 10 bonds since I've been here. So we did 3 this last year, which seems like an awful lot. But once you do the one refunding, you've got everything in order. So the second refunding and the third refunding, gets a little easier. So they're always looking for opportunities to refund bonds and have savings, and we've been really successful at that. So one of the questions that came up earlier, and that's this slide is showing you, is the history of our debt service payments to our budget. So you can see where we've been at from 2010-11 to 2019-20. I just want to point out 2 issues. In 2014-15, that's when we undertook the large bond refundings. So we had a significant reduction in our debt that year to our percentage of our overall budget. And then in 15-16, that's when we transferred $5.6 million over to the Capital Reserve Fund, and that was for the Ison and Wayne project that we paid cash for.
So I want to give just another brief overview, and then I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Brooks, and he will go into more detail. But this is a slide that shows the potential project and the intentional improvements as related to the proposed projects. I'm not going to go down the list and read everything to you. Mr. Petiti put this in a really nice format where you can see projects that were currently identified on the capital plan, and you can see if funds have been set aside in the capital plan for those projects, and if it has been, the amounts. You can also see projects that made it to the capital plan in the middle but have not been funded, and if it would be addressed by this potential improvements. And then you can see a lot of other projects that we talked about and we identified as needs, but they're currently not on the capital plan. And they would all be addressed if this project was to be completed.
Michelle, I just would like to clarify one thing on this. So in the top section, we have all 3 check marks. So for instance, Prevo bleachers, 1.4 million. But then below that, you have additional funds for bleachers. So is that the Anki bleachers there that you're talking about, that there are an additional 1.2?
No, this is just Prevost. And if you remember when we were looking at funding the bleachers on Prevost Field, we initially determined that the project was going to be substantially more expensive because of that retaining wall that's holding the pool. So we were trying to fund that over 4 or 5 fiscal years, or 3 fiscal years, I'm sorry, to make sure that we had enough money set aside to address the retaining wall and install the bleachers as well. This plan and the capital plan currently does not take into consideration any seating on Anki Field.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you to clarify where it says funds allocated in capital reserve fund? Is that the actual capital projects fund or the capital commitments in our other fund?
So it's not the capital projects fund. The capital projects fund is used when you borrow bonds.
Okay.
And then you pay for a project. You pay for that out of your capital projects.
Okay. So this is just the committed
This is a
fund.
capital reserve fund. That's separate. That's Fund 32 that we talk about sometimes when we're talking about budget.
Okay.
And those dollars have actually been moved and are budgeted for in Fund 32.
Okay.
We have not touched what's in the general fund in the reserved amount for capital projects. That's still sitting and remaining.
And the items at the top, Michelle, so don't just piggybacking on Susan's question, didn't necessarily denote the total cost for the project, but those were the dollars that had been allocated for the project. They weren't necessarily suggesting that's how much that piece would cost.
Correct, and you could tell that when you look. The very first item is Prevost turf replacement for $323,000. You can see below that in the section that's not funded, Prevost field improvements and track resurfacing. We know that the turf replacement will probably be higher than that $323,000. So we anticipated funding some additional funds to replace that turf field and make some improvements to the track. We know that the track needs to be resurfaced. I think Mr. Brooks might actually have a picture of that he might share with you tonight. And we also know that there were some potential improvements, such as moving the long jump and making some other improvements to the track as it currently is set up.
So some of those items represent our attempts to try to allocate maybe $300,000 or $400,000 a year to try to build up dollars, knowing that had to be done. And the second area are all items that so some of them could be encompassing some of those from the top as well, but those are additional pieces that we just haven't we've put it into the capital plan, but we haven't really set aside the dollars yet.
Correct. And some of those items that are up on the top have actually come from money that was transferred in a previous fiscal year and then didn't get spent, and so it's earned interest, so the amount has grown. So what was originally transferred was originally set aside for the Prevost turf replacement was around $270,000, so that money has grown since we haven't used it. So did I miss anything on that list you wanted to address?
I
Michelle,
just want to make sure, does anybody have questions about this page?
Very quickly. So I'm looking ahead. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you don't have any cost or estimate breakdowns for each of those items identified as future needs. But it does look like later on in the document that we have here, where it has the project scope breakdown, it looks like there are some dollar amounts assigned there. I'm just wondering why how come, you know.
So what we were trying to show with those items that are identified down in the bottom is that we've actually talked about all of those things as we've been talking about our capital plan. Our capital plan only goes out 5 years. So these items have all been identified by administration for things that needed to be addressed.
Mhm.
We didn't actually have dollar amounts assigned to them. You're absolutely right. We do now that we've engaged Breslin Architects. We could put dollars on there. We just didn't feel that we were comfortable doing it at the last minute to put it on this slide.
Okay.
Because if you look at the documents that you have,
Yeah.
Pool decking is not broken out specifically with a cost, so we just left those blank.
Okay, thanks.
Things just happen. I mean, it's not news to anyone that our gym isn't air conditioned. Our gym and the auxiliary gym and the wrestling room haven't been air conditioned, obviously, for many, many years. So these are all decisions and discussions over the years when we look at our entire, all of our facilities. Over the years, there's been discussions about where things get moved on the capital, project and how they then receive allocation for dollars.
So one of the things that happens with our capital plan is every year around this time we review it. Things you may have heard the term get pushed. We might decide that we had originally anticipated doing it in 2021, and we have decided that we can wait another year. So we'll actually push some projects. So what may have been anticipated for 2021 on the capital plan may not necessarily happen. And then we also find that sometimes projects didn't cost as much as we had anticipated, or we decided we didn't necessarily need to do them, but we had funded them, so then we reallocate those dollars. And that's done every year. So one of the other things I wanted to talk just briefly about, which we didn't really talk about, is if we were to borrow the $20 million or $24 million that we originally talked about when Zach and Mike and Ed were here, it would have very, very little impact on our budget in terms of the slide that I had previously showed you here. Because if you look at what's in 1920, that is what we actually budgeted for debt service payments compared to what our annual budget was. We've had some savings, as you have seen, that we have not taken into consideration there, and that would help offset the cost of the bond payments that we would need to make. So it would have very, very little impact.
So talk a little bit more about that. So what do you mean by very, very little impact?
So I think if we were to borrow some additional funds based on what our current debt service payments are and what the new payments would be, our percentage of budget would probably be right around 6.57% as it is currently. We will end the 2019-20 fiscal year, and we will have paid 6.2% of our debt service based on our current debt service payments and the savings that we had. So it will remain basically the same as you see on this slide here, or be slightly higher, but it will not be a significant impact. It will not jump 2% or 1%. It'll be small.
So just that, Michelle, this is the page, Zach and Mike, and I'm sorry, I forget the third person, Ed, their presentation, where they showed what our debt payments would be till 2035 and then the 2 or 3 years after. If you look at this page with Michelle and you look at the pages with the three of them that they're proposing, that's how you can see that over the next 15 years, they're proposing a debt structure that basically keeps our debt service payments in that 6 to 7, I think under 8, except for the last 2 or 3 years, whereas our budget will continue to grow. So as a percentage of our budget, as a percentage of our budget, our debt service payment will stay relatively flat, potentially even drop further, only because our expenditures will continue to rise. The page I'm missing is the one that showed our, whereas as recently as, in 2010, our budget, our debt service was, almost 10% of our budget in the 11-12 year. So that's what, Lydia, that's what they're saying about this. And that's the reason that they made the intention and would recommend, if we move forward, that we do this wraparound debt so that we can keep our debt service payments relatively constant as a percentage of our budget.
And so one of the things that will continue to work with PFM and Benning and Scattergood and RBC is we'll continue to look at our bonds and see if there are refunding opportunities. And that may allow us to level out some of those bump years where, as Zach mentioned earlier, that we couldn't address with the refundings. There could be potential to address those when we do bond refundings in the future.
Michelle, I know it's difficult to, and I think this is where some of the questions were going before, to develop a rule of thumb because there's so many factors that are involved. And where I'm going with this is, I remember years ago a business manager saying to me, a rule of thumb is that 10 to 15% for debt service. Obviously, there's a lot of factors, and that's what they were talking about before. There's districts that are above 15% and are still doing very well, and because of reasons for whatever they're doing with additions and other things. Is that a good rule of thumb, though, to guide us as a district? I mean, what is that rule of thumb for debt service? And I don't know if the others want to chime in as well with that or comfort.
I'll answer, and then if they want to chime in, they can certainly jump in. So I've always heard that a rule of thumb is exactly what you said, somewhere between 10, 12 to 15% as a total of your budget for your debt service. We are definitely well below that. But as you said, there's a lot of factors, and there are some districts that are below us. There are some districts that are above that factor. When Zach actually sends the listing around that shows where all those other districts are that are comparable to us, you'll see there's a low of 4.4% on there, and there's a high of 21.7%. And all of those districts have very favorable bond ratings. So it just depends on a lot of factors that are occurring within your district, and whether your fund balance is growing, whether you're using your fund balance responsibly. All of those things will be taken into consideration.
Would you mind sending us that spread? The sheet
I have it. I can definitely send it out to everybody.
It'd just be interesting to see. Thanks.
Michelle, we'll clean that up and send it back to you tomorrow morning.
They'll clean it up and send it to me. Did you guys want to add anything to that, or do you think I addressed it?
I think that was a good answer.
Okay. Do you want me to take you back one more slide so you can show the pictures? I kind of rushed.
Ms. Dico, I have just one question before Mark takes over. Okay. Going back to the previous slide where you showed that there had been 1.9 million that had been committed, that's just I want to make sure I heard this right. That's in Fund 32, the Capital Reserve Fund?
That is correct. That's in Fund 32.
And then how much
There's actually more than that in Fund 32, but that's what's been committed in Fund 32 for potential projects.
For these specific projects.
Related to the high school that could be addressed.
And then roughly, again, remind me, how much is in Fund 10, the general fund, that's committed to capital but not yet transferred over to the, and if you don't know, we can.
I don't know, but when I go back to my seat, I can look it up and I can tell you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Good evening. What we wanted to do was to go through with you guys tonight just a couple things. You've all seen this timeline before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just to say that, things started back in November of 2016. This process has been a very thoughtful one. I think that there's been a great review of needs and wants and trying to determine what is best for the district. There's been community outreach, community input. Again, they have had a thorough review of what the needs and wants are. I think it's been responsible, and I think they've been good stewards. This committee has been very good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck. And, one of the questions may come up is, are we getting, so the kitchen analogy, are we getting the granite countertops or are we getting the Formica? Well, we're kind of getting the Formica. But we want to have some room in there in case we need to upgrade a little bit more. So as a car analogy, we're not getting the Austin Martin, we're getting the Honda. And we're working between the Civic and the Accord type of thing. options to consider. These are things that had been considered and had been determined that, well, because of certain reasons, including costs, they might not fit into what we're looking to do. Just a couple of them looking at is parking garages. Parking's an issue on the campus. We looked at 2 different locations, one of which is underneath the JV baseball field by the senior lot, and then putting the field on top of that. That was one option we looked at. And then another one down by the King of Prussia Road entrance by Penn. We also looked at relocating the track, for example, on the campus to try and give ourselves a little bit more flexibility. So again, I won't spend a lot of time on that, just for you to look at, just to give you an idea of some other things that were talked about. One of the things that I think is important to realize is we did determine what the needs were. And it's important to look at the one thing that everybody's talked about and is just glaring in our faces is the need that we need to make our campus accessible to people with all abilities of all ages. So whether you're 1.5 years old or 100 years old, whether you're able-bodied or you're not able-bodied, we need to make sure that people of all ages can make it across our campus. That currently is not the case. We also need to look at, we identified that we need to look at what is the possible enrollment going to look like, and that's obviously tied to our priority project for the facilities plan moving forward. The other thing we need to look at, and again, I'll use this analogy, I've used this before, so forgive me if you heard this, but if you can think of that you're out in Montana and you've got mountains in the background, you got a pristine lake out there. It's a mirror image. We all know what it looks like to throw a pebble in the water and the ripples that it makes. What we need to think about is when that pebble, we know the result of that pebble going in the water, we need to think about that pebble going down, how it affects the current, when it whacks a fish on top of the head and the fish goes off in a different trajectory, or when it hits the bottom and then creates soot and the soot gets re-established. That's what I mean about unintended consequences. So we try to look through these things, and as things came up, we really tried to give it a very thoughtful, rational thought process to say, how would this impact? This is great to take care of this, but how would it also look at other things? So we did go through that process again. I think it's important also that the students, we're moving forward and we're kind of on the cutting edge of this. We need to have students with a lifelong health and wellness culture, and certainly by having a fitness center, we looked at that as a positive move forward, that we needed that. We need to right-size our facilities. In some cases, we downsized the number of bleachers we had because we didn't need them. But we also need to right-size other things like bathroom facilities, which we currently don't have to service people on our campus. And then we need to, replace the infrastructure that has, in some cases are older than I am, I hate to say, and reached its useful life. Hopefully I have not, or exceeded its useful life, and hopefully I have not. So these are things that the committee has looked at pretty extensively. These are things that are in your packet that we've talked about, fast facts about things. Here's the breakdown of the project itself, as you guys have seen before. And tonight, what you have a resolution in front of you to go ahead and approve the architect to proceed with $24,242,192 worth of work. Although, again, you're not committing that dollars tonight. All you're committing is that we're going to do everything except 9, 10, 11 on this list. We're going to come back to you at a later point. We think that we need to look at this a little bit differently, maybe do a little bit more study on this. And at some point, we'll probably come back to you and say, we'd like to expend maybe $10,000 just to get to the point where we can go to PennDOT and say, is the road possible, yes or no? Here's the documentation. They come back and say no, then we know that that's not happening. If they say yes, then that's the time for another discussion. I open up for any questions that you all might have.
Yeah. So I'll start on the end. Liz, do you have questions?
I don't have any questions. I understand the rationale for tabling 9 through 11 to make sure we keep this moving forward. I just say that I would like to see, in my opinion, getting to that next stage so that we have an answer from PennDOT, so that we know, if we decide that parking and moving the maintenance facility, or maybe the maintenance facility goes elsewhere, but just kind of closing the loop there and not just having that stalled, because if it does make sense to include it in the project, but I understand why we're tabling it right now. But in my opinion, I would like to see that continue to move forward so we have an answer once and for all from PennDOT.
Thank you.
Okay, Liz, thank you. Bradley, do you have questions?
Just one quick question about the pool, and then another question following up on something we asked at the meeting last week. So for the pool, we talked a little bit tonight about the pool having been around for 48 years. The pool itself, is that still have useful life left? Because the pool itself isn't being replaced in this proposal. A lot of the systems around the pool and the deck and other improvements are being made.
So yes, the pool itself is still viable moving forward. We will have replastering done to it, and that's typically what you do to rejuvenate a pool. So the pool itself will be replastered. The areas around the pool, the decking would be replaced because that's exceeded its useful life. It was put in 71, and you know the anti-skid resistance that was on there back in 71, you know, left many years ago, and so we're struggling through that as we move forward. But to answer your question, the pool itself the integrity is good. We don't have to dig out the thing and start over again. But again, we just want to replaster it moving forward.
And just to follow up on our conversation a week ago at the Committee of the Whole meeting for the Finance Committee, I had asked you about this idea of if we wanted to change the scope of any of these items. And just now when you were up speaking, you said we're committing to $24 million. But I just want to make clear to the public and everyone else, what does that mean when you say we're committing to the $24 million? If we decide in the future, if we contract with the architect to do this, what are we contracting with them to do? And how much flexibility is there to say, we need a larger fitness center, spend more money. We need a smaller fitness center, spend less money. How much flexibility after tonight, if we vote to move this forward, is there to have a $28 million versus $20 million project?
I'm sure Steve will agree with this. He's sitting in the audience, but a great deal of flexibility. Again, we have a general concept here. Well, the next step is hiring Steve and his group to come in and start meeting with groups, getting stakeholders' input, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, getting down to the level of what is the right amount for that fitness center? Is that fitness center, you know, 1 floor, 2 floors? Is that fitness center 4,000 square feet, or is it 6,000 square feet? We don't have all those answers yet, but as we move forward and gather additional information, that's where we can better have that discussion. And again, when I say 24 million, that's just a conceptual on the numbers that you saw there. That's what we're asking you to proceed. So actually, it's everything except for 9, 10, 11. Again, we will have the ability to draw things out if need be, or shrink them if need be. But at this point, this is kind of a general, let us get started type of thing.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Nancy, questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. This may be for Michelle. When you went through the numbers that have already been identified in the budget for Fund 10 and Fund 32, the total is about $4 million. Is it safe to say that that $4 million can be deducted from the 24?
I'll defer. But
Yes.
You could certainly have those conversations. If those items are not going to be completed and are going to be addressed by the project, you could say we're going to use those dollars to help offset the cost of the project, or they could be reallocated to other needs throughout the district.
And that is a decision we would not have to make tonight.
Right.
And that is a decision that we can, a discussion we should have. And that's a discussion we're going to want to have also, again, with our, with our bond counsel to talk about and for us to weigh. We heard scenarios about the importance of fund balance. We hear the importance of balancing what we have reserved. And we're going to have to talk about, do we want to use some of those dollars or not, is a discussion we can have.
Mm-hmm. And the only other thing is just a general comment, and I think everyone has more or less said this before. The importance of the ADA is without question, and I think that as board members, our responsibility is not only the instruction for the students, but also where they do it, and not the athletic facilities are just an additional part of the total experience. And it's beyond just the high school students, it's the community as well. Absolutely. So I think given what we've been hearing, just with the debt service and everything, it's very reassuring. And I would, I think it makes sense to not be at a standstill and continue to kind of just move this along. that would, just a comment I'd like to make.
Thank you.
Jeff, questions?
Mark, I see in Ken's note from the superintendent where he goes through different bullet points of confirming certain pertinent data. And Nancy just touched upon this, and I think it's really important, and maybe we can be forward-looking. It says here at least 1,200 community members regularly utilize Prevost and Enki.
Yes.
Clearly, a number of community members are using the pool, RAC. And I want to know, and you don't have to go detail by detail, but conceptually, how does this project envision enveloping the community even more, perhaps, whether it be the fitness facility, the pool, the locker rooms, how does this, because I think that's a really important point that I haven't heard a lot, but I know that we've heard from members of the community about how they're going to benefit and their role, and if this goes forward, that sort of that benefit. Could you expand upon that?
Sure. Again, we looked at this from an academic and interscholastic point of view, because that's what we're here to do for the school district. Certainly the community benefits on top of whatever we do. So there were certain aspects, for example, one of the things that I when I got here that I found to be somewhat cause for concern is that if we have kids out on that Anki field and parents drop the kids off at night, they're off with one of the other children dropping them off or going to a dance recital or shopping, whatever it happens to be, and a lightning storm comes up, we have no safe haven for those kids. They're standing out in the field that could potentially be struck by lightning. So when we looked at what we could do, we looked at the field house and said, well, wait a minute, here is a place that maybe we get the kids to be able to huddle up into, in this case, the second floor underneath a roof. Mom and dad come back to pick them up. Those types of things we looked at. We looked at certainly the bathroom facilities, because at this point there's porta potties out there for Anki Field and even Prevost Field on the visitor side, so we looked at that as a positive. The fitness center, candidly, we have groups of our students who are paying money out of their pocket or through clubs to go to a separate gym. It'd be nice to make sure that all our students are in a safe environment that we can control. Do we open that up to community at some point? That's yet to be determined. That's certainly a possibility. But again, we looked at this from the standpoint of what do we need for our students, both academically and and especially with the Wellness Center, because we're looking at this whole wellness curriculum moving forward and wellness initiative, and then also a safe campus type of thing. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think that's important points that you made. And I guess when I see 1,200, it's not contextual. So I just think it's so important that yes, it's for the students and they're a number one stakeholder, but the community is part of this too. And I think it's important if we're going to make a big decision to move forward, and the amount of money, even though it seems very prudent in my opinion, to move forward, that this is for all of Radnor.
Correct.
And I think that's really important.
Correct.
And even though it's for the students, they're number one, they're the priority, but that this is a township opportunity.
Absolutely. We had, we did, when we looked at the infrastructure committee, 79% of the students are using Prevost or Anki Field, using the facilities, and that includes the band. So that's a huge number. And then you factor in all the students who go to private schools that still come to our campus for various sports reasons, whether it be swimming through RAC or through one of the other club sports that are out there with the lacrosse, soccer, football, or the like, as well as the youth program. So while 1,200 sounds like a lot, I would probably argue that it's more than 1,200. I don't have that data, but my sense is with that parking lot and as many people as we have coming in and out of there, and as number of people I've seen on the campus on a given weekend rotate through, I would argue the fact it's probably about 1,200 people that benefit.
Jeff, is that it? Great. Okay, Andrew?
So mostly I just want to make some comments, basically because the fiscal questions that I had, the fiscal concerns that I had, have been addressed little by little over time, and then tonight with the presentation, I think it really helped quite a bit. I think that, a document that you shared with me about, which I thought was very helpful, which may be shared with the board over time, just basically about how a large infrastructure project like this rolls out and what the steps are. I think that was very helpful. Michelle's presentation. So all the information that we've gotten so far, looking at this as a 2-year process. This is not something that has happened overnight. At the same time, we're all going to be doing our due diligence here to make sure that we're keeping an eye on things and making sure that that we're looking at what's happening in constant communication. And so for me, really the fiscal issues and those concerns have been really top of mind. The other issues about holistically what this offers our kids and our communities, I mean, you could really just rhetorically ask why this hasn't been done earlier. I know that Mike Miller, I served on the facilities committee with Mike a couple of years ago, and he would ask that, and he was kind of beating the drum for a long time that that the money's so cheap. It'd be so. The fiscal issue. I try to see the big picture of this, and it seems that it makes sense for us to go forward, sort of along the lines of what Nancy said, kind of get the ball rolling on this.
So when I first got here, somebody had asked me, one of the board members asked me, Mark, you graduated in 1979. Could you let me know what changed since then? And yes, you have a beautiful Radnor Elementary School and a beautiful middle school, and that's certainly new. But really, at the high school, certainly they renovated part of it, but from the sports field, not much else. And we identified, Mr. Pajukis has been working on an archiving project, identified a photo from 1960, so we were trying to hammer down exactly when those bleachers were put in, so we've narrowed down between 1957 and 1960. You got your money's worth out of those. Just saying.
Good for nostalgia.
Yeah, exactly.
Andrew, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sarah?
No, I think you know where I stand. I just want to vote and get this moving.
Okay. Lydia?
Yeah, so I want to make it really clear that I support parts of this project and actually want to expedite them. So what I'm going to say is not about supporting parts of this project. It's that this timing of this, I think, is awful. So before I say anything more, my idea would be to split this into a couple of, basically 2 pieces, and expedite the part that is the ADA compliance and the bleachers, and actually, having heard some more of this, a couple of more things on here are safety issues. But I have questions about parts of what we're doing in Section 3, the field house, and the upper level building addition. And I'm not convinced that those are things that rise to the same level of need as the ADA compliance and the bleachers project. And so when I say that I think the timing of this is awful, I want to be clear that to my new fellow board members, when I say that, it's not because I don't think you haven't done your homework or that you're not prepared or that, I think you all have and you've followed the projects. So I don't want to imply that you're not ready or you're not up to speed. What I'm more talking about is for us as a board, we haven't had any conversations about what our priorities are as a group. I really don't know what else you guys might want to do. I just feel like the timing is, I'll just keep using the word, it's awful. So the other part that I just have to say is that, frankly, there's only 2 people sitting up here who've actually been through a teacher contract negotiation in Radnor. Well, halfway, because the last one. Okay. 3 years ago? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So 3.
Trial by
Sorry.
fire.
I believe I was here all of 4 months, and I was thrown into
I
a...
always stick my foot in my mouth. Okay. So my thought is, and I'll tell you very clearly where my priorities are. I want to pay our teachers. That's where my priority is, teachers in front of students. Teachers come to us and, we always have to, sort of say, well, we can't do everything. And there's always demands on our resources. So with regard to this project, I just don't feel that we have done anything more. At this point, it seems to me a little bit like a rubber stamp. So let me take the analogy. Somebody was saying we're buying a Honda. Okay. If you were really buying a car and you went out and said, you went to the dealer and you said, this is a great car. You look at this presentation. These are things we want for our students. And the guy says, well, it's $30,000. And, well, you would say, well, I wasn't prepared to pay that. I was prepared to pay 20. And you end up at something lower than that. That is the step that this board has not done, in my mind. We have not done the pushback to this administration to say, what of this project are the top priorities to you, and what are the things that, honestly got pushed in there because maybe one person really wanted it, or, for example, the classrooms. Nobody's really explained to me why we need 4 more classrooms. We had a study 3 years ago that said we don't need any more classrooms. We haven't talked about that. So there's things in there that I just think it's our obligation, because we're spending other people's money, we're spending taxpayers' money, it's our job to ask those questions. So I do really want to say to the group, the committee that worked on this, I really appreciate all your hard work, and I appreciate your spirit of enthusiasm. And this is no reflection on that we don't believe in your vision. This is what we have to do as public servants, because we're spending everybody else's money. If this was my money, I might just say, go with it. But we're spending other people's money. And so we haven't had the conversation either. And I brought this up and somebody said they don't agree with it, but why aren't we sharing the costs with Radnor Soccer, or looking at, going back to RAC, the Radnor Aquatics Club, or the youth football, the youth lacrosse? Why are we not looking at sharing the costs of this? And why aren't we looking maybe at, we're saying this is for all the residents for the township, why aren't we looking at maybe getting the township to share this, or looking at ADA grants for some of this? So I'm not at the point where I'm convinced that we have to pay for all this. So where I'm hung up on all this is the money. And so my vision would be break it into pieces, if it would be amenable, get everything done but parts of Section 3 and 4. In other words, make that, our pitch right now, and then come back and have discussions. We haven't asked the administration, what would you do for $7 million? What would you do for $10 million? What would you do for $15 million? I've never heard those answers. I've just heard, this is a great project, which it is. It looks great. It's great, but we haven't really had the hard discussions about what we're giving up to do this. Yes, the financing looks appealing, and tonight was very illuminating, but you're spending money on something else. It means that you can't spend it on teachers in front of students, or you can't spend it on personnel that maybe have more impact on students. So I am in support of parts of this project, so I don't want it to stop, but I want us to do our job. I want us not to be rubber stamps for something that, and maybe you all would rather spend money on this. And then under the Act 1 environment, right now it's only 2.6%. When the teachers come to negotiate with us, I want to be on record as saying I want to have a lot for them, and so maybe a little less of this. I want to do major parts of this, but we haven't sort of had the discussion about the edges of this, and can this be less than 24 million or 28 million? So,
And Lydia, could I
that's
just?
right.
No, hey, it's good. It's all good. Do you want to comment? Because I was going to make a comment, but I'm happy to let you go first.
Sure. I just wanted to comment one of the things that we were very purposeful in doing in this, and that was included in the timeline, is that this has been a very thoughtful process where there has been a lot of pushback. We purposely put 2 school board members on not only the feasibility study, but they were also part of the planning with the architect. So there has been, I would argue that there's actually been a great deal of pushback, of refining, of let's look at this, let's understand, are we being responsible? So in nowhere over the course of the timeline, and the timeline goes beyond just the last year and a half, we've had I would say, a lot of board involvement at many facility committees about this project and discussions. What came forward was the reality as we started to move forward, and as Mr. Brooks listed some of the things that were discussed that didn't make it to the list, that were, possibly wants versus needs, and what were the needs, they became very interwound. And that's the piece that we've talked about over several meetings about trying to address the accessibility, how the pieces became interconnected. So I do want to say that I do feel like there has been a great deal of pushback from the board and great conversation. And I think the board, somebody earlier in the meeting mentioned that this project is noble, understandable, and available. And I would say the board through the last 2 years with this has been thoughtful, responsible, and has really worked hard to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. Would be 3 other terms I would add to this project because of the time that this has taken to develop this and the pushback that has been involved. I hear you, Lydia, completely about the challenges. I mean, being thrown into a teacher negotiation on my first month here, and those discussions we had that summer, were challenging. We worked very collaboratively with our Teachers Association to develop a 5-year agreement. We have developed 5-year agreements with many of our other groups moving forward in the last 3 years. And again, I think that comes not from rubber stamps. It comes from all of us challenging one another, all of us pushing one another, asking the tough questions, debating these pieces, but also realizing we have a responsibility to not only address the contracts, not only address our educational programs, but we have responsibilities to address our infrastructure. And these are all different pieces that we have to deal with. And one piece doesn't necessarily take away from another piece. We have to responsibly do it all, and that's our challenge, I think, within the budget.
I'm sorry, I didn't say anything because I spoke at length in November, it was just last month's board meeting, about how strongly I felt about this project and how much time and effort I've put into this project. And Lydia, I've been sitting here choosing my words carefully. I resent you saying that this is a rubber stamp. I have been paying very, very close attention to this project from the minute it came up. No, it's my turn. I have spent countless hours during work days that I could be getting paid, spending time with members of this community who also have jobs, who could also be getting paid for that time, addressing this project, looking at it piece by piece. We are not approving $24 million tonight or $28 million tonight. We are approving conceptually this project needs to be done. It's very nice to think, oh, well, maybe we don't need to approve the field house. If you take the field house out, there are team rooms and a concession stand and toilets in that building that you need to put someplace else. So you haven't actually saved money. You've thrown the designs and the plans up in the air and said, here, fix this, and probably added costs to the project. The same is true for every piece in this project. The one piece that was very clearly separable and potentially wouldn't get approved was the access road and the maintenance building that goes on it. And I think that behind the scenes, I certainly said it, the steering committee heard me say it, can we just yank that piece out? It'll bring down the costs, it'll make it more palatable to the board, and we can do it later if we have the money. I do feel strongly, like Liz, that is an important piece, that access road and the parking lot that goes with it, maybe not the maintenance building. To say that no one here is aware of this, I mean, you got it in your packet. The bond materials, they came in the board packets in June. Not everybody reads what goes to the other policies. I understand not everybody comes to the other committees. I'm sorry. I understand that not everybody comes to the other committee meetings, but this material has been before this board since before I got on this board. Information about the need for this facilities. I went to one of those big feasibility committee meetings with the public. It was long. It was very, very well attended. I have not seen very many evening meetings of Radnor that many people show up. People in this community feel strongly about it. I understand that you know people who don't. But when I speak to those people, and they've come to me and said, I get some of this is ADA, but the rest of it's not. And when I explain to them, okay, some of it's not ADA, but a lot of it's safety, a lot of it's improvement of our children's welfare and their experience, most of them turn around and go, oh, I guess somebody didn't explain it to me right. So I think that maybe at this point, it's worth being a steward of the education that these students have and going out and educating the community about what it is we're trying to do here. I'm not trying to undercut teachers. I don't think it's fair to imply that anybody on this board cares less about teachers than we do about an infrastructure project. But these teachers also have to teach and work in this environment. And we're offering them a place that we don't think is at standard. We're not saying it has to be state of the art. We're saying it should meet a basic standard for educational facilities. So I'm sorry that was long. I don't mean to keep people here late, but please don't ever say that I'm rubber stamping something. I spend a lot of nights here away from my children and my family. I spend a lot of days at the building, and I do not appreciate someone implying that I don't read and understand the work that I'm doing and the votes that I take.
So if there's anybody who thought...
Could I just say something if that's there? Maybe I didn't choose my words wisely. I said it feels like that. And why it feels like that to me is that the first time I saw $27 million was in the middle of November. I saw the presentations about how we might finance a bill. I saw originally a $500,000 price tag on this back when we were talking about the bleachers. Then it grew to a couple million. I don't know the exact amount. I never saw anything of this magnitude till the middle of November. So that is what I'm referring to. And again, please, no one up here think that I'm casting aspersions on any of you because I have a different of opinion. I have respect for all of you and your opinions as well.
All right. Well, if anybody thought we were always going to get along, we have difference of opinions. Thank you all for the work tonight. I actually think tonight's presentation did a really nice job of laying out the story, to a member of the public's words, the knowable, the understandable, the available. I had jotted that down as well, Ken. I thought that was really a very good way of explaining how this has come about. Things are relative. In 1999, we spent $35 million on a renovation at the high school. That, in today's dollars, I think is worth about $58 million. Makes 24 seem like not so bad. When the infrastructure committee, when the steering committee was interviewing architects, they interviewed a number of architects, and they did not go with certain architects because the plans were beautiful, but more elaborate and estimated to cost a whole lot more money. Had you brought one of those plans to us first, this would seem more reasonable. So everything is relative. But let me be clear, I fully support this, and it's a lot of money. So I am grateful that we have a financing team who can help us navigate financing this in a responsible manner, and it's a lot of money. So our charge, my charge, to the people that we're working with after this vote goes through, and assuming it goes through, is that we need to continue to task our administrators and our architect with coming back at every stage and giving us options that allow us to say if there's ways where we could make choices that are a little bit less expensive, that we have some options before us. There may be places where we might want to spend more money. But we also need to understand some of the economics of this. Steel is very expensive right now. So there's some cost associated with building right now. Prevailing wage is a phenomenon. We can't bid this job out the way I would bid out, my home kitchen project. So prevailing wages drive some of this. There are factors in this that cause the number to be what the number is. And, Mark, we need to task you guys with working with the architect to, try to find us cost savings. And when the bidding process goes through, we need to really drive that home. No one up here, even if they're 100% in favor of this project, no one up here loves spending $24 million. We are grateful that we have a responsible manner in which to do it. I think I speak pretty well for all of us. We would like it to cost less money. And I really appreciate Ken and the administration coming forward with the option of segmenting off the access driveway and the maintenance shed in a manner that allows us to put forth some money to do the PennDOT study. To Liz's point, we need to answer that question once and for all. Because the issues of traffic around the high school and parking around the high school have plagued us for years. They will continue to go on. There's two things about this project as you go into the schematic design phase. I'll be really interested to see if we don't move the maintenance shed and do the driveway access. I'll be really interested to see what the back of the building where the swimming entrance is, what that's going to look like and how they can configure some parking back there, because that was one of the very important pieces that was achieved by moving the maintenance shed was some additional parking in an area where we felt like we needed some. So that would be really important to me. And as someone who has spent a lot of cold Friday nights sitting in the bleachers, I don't know if the bleachers are going to be aluminum and cold, or if they're that other material that is if there's something else that's either more cost-effective or less cold. And then I think the other thing that, and Lydia mentioned, yeah, there'll be Formica, thanks. Lydia mentioned this last week, and I do think it's an important component, is that, if there are ways for us to do some green, some eco-friendly construction, eco-friendly options that may save us money in the long run, we certainly, I guess I'll speak for myself, but I'm seeing head nods, we would certainly be interested in understanding what some of those options might be that could, we have LEED buildings in the township, and we are proud of those LEED buildings in the district. So that's really all I wanted to say about that. At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion that we pass a resolution approving the recommendation of the Facilities Infrastructure Steering Committee to move forward with the high school ADA Accessibility and Wellness Infrastructure Project. We need a little acronym for that one, Michael. First presented during the business meeting on November 19th, and projected to cost $24,521,192, and that we direct the administration and the solicitor to negotiate an agreement subject to board approval with Breslin, Ridyard, and Federo Architects to prepare the design and bidding documents for the project.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? And opposed? Okay, the motion passes 7-1. Thank you all very much.
On behalf of the Infrastructure
Okay,
Committee, thank you. On behalf of the Infrastructure Committee, thank you very much for this.
Thank you all,
confidence.
and thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. Okay, with that, we're going to move into our consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. With the consent of all board members, they are therefore grouped, and approval is given in one motion. In the event a board member wants to discuss any item, the board president will move it to an appropriate place on the agenda. Are there any items that people would like to pull tonight from the agenda?
13.2.
Okay, great. Any others? I'm going to be pulling item 10.7. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve items 10.1 through 14.1, minus item 10.7 and 13.2. May I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, the motion passes 8-0. I pulled number 10.7 because, Mrs. Deco, if you could please just give a quick overview. At the Finance Committee meeting last week, we referenced that we would be seeing an approval to accept and award the 2019-2020 Spring Varsity Athletic Supply bids, and they are on the agenda tonight. But if you could just quickly walk, the board through that process of why it is that a bid was submitted for a certain amount, but we're approving it for a different amount, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. First, let me address Mr. Moore's question about how much was in the committed fund balance for capital projects. It's under Resolution 8.1, Bradley, if you wanted to look at that. It's $6,655,506. So we do bids for various things throughout the course of the year. With athletics, we do 3 bids per school year. We do one for fall supplies, one for winter, and one for spring, just because of storage issues up at the high school. We reach out to our coaches and our athletic director and our trainer to find out what kind of supplies they need. We then put together a document that lists all of the supplies we're looking to purchase, and we send it out to vendors who may have requested to be added to the bid or have bid on our projects or bid on our bids in the past. And then when we get those bids back, we enter all of the prices into the system. And the first column that you see is the total bids submitted. That is every single item that the vendors have bid on. They could be the low bidder, they could be the highest bidder. We just enter everything into the system. Then we go back and we look at all of the bids, and we select the lowest responsible bidder and for the various items. And we do it by item. So if there's something that came in significantly higher than we anticipated cost-wise, we might not award that. Or if the quality is very low, we might not award it. We look at every single item. We meet with the athletic director and the trainer to make sure that they meet their needs. And if they do, we award it to the lowest bidder. So there will be things that we receive bids on that we may have determined that we no longer need or that we might need more of. And we'll go back in those cases to the lowest bidder and ask them if they will honor it for more pricing. They typically will do that for at least 190 days or so. And then once we get all of that done, we bring it to the board for approval.
So, thank you, Mrs. Deco. So just as an example, a vendor could submit, many of these vendors may have submitted for a variety of items, and so the same item is bid out from several vendors, and you went ahead and awarded the bid to the lowest responsible bidder, which is the reason the dollar amounts can be so different.
Correct.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much. I
You're
hope
welcome.
everyone understands that. Great. So I would like to make a motion to approve item 10.7, if I could have a motion. Great. And a second? Okay, so Liz's motion and Jeff's second. All those in favor? The motion passes 8-0. Okay, Bradley, you pulled 13.2.
Mrs. Goldman wasn't available tonight, but we wanted to let the public and the board know that we had both expressed some interest in this position, and we discussed it. We both believe that what the DCIU does for our district and other schools in the county is very important. And after our conversation, we agreed mutually that Mrs. Goldman's name should be submitted to the board for consideration for this, and we asked the administration to put her name up for this board position for this vote.
Okay, so do you want to make a motion to approve this?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Oh, actually, Lydia, you need to recuse.
Yeah, you know what?
So I'll take a different second. Right, and all those in favor? The motion passes 7-0 with one abstention. Okay, great. So let's see, we are now going to move into liaison reports, which might be light tonight, but we'll start off with our first one, Delaware County Community College.
No report.
Delaware County Unit, Mrs. Goldman's not here, so no report. Federal Relations Network, Mr. Babs, Dr. Babson.
Not much to report, just that the NSBA Advocacy Institute is coming up in February.
Oh, that's right, I saw that. In DC, right?
Yep.
Great,
DC,
super.
yep.
Delaware County School Board's Legislative Council, Mr. Moore.
Yes, Mrs. Goldman attended this meeting with Mr. Petiti. She asked me to share a few points from the meeting. At this meeting, there was a legislative report discussing 20 bills that were sent to the governor. It looks like about 5 of them involved education. A couple of bills of note that would be relevant to schools across the state. There was a bill for school voucher and charter reform, House Bill 1800. It did not get enough support for a vote, but this is something that some members of the legislature will continue to push, and we should be on the lookout for it. Also, there is a bipartisan group considering property tax reform, various proposals for property tax reform. There are the different ways those might be implemented generally move some revenues to being collected different ways through sales tax and less through local property taxes. That has implications for local school districts, the potential to lose some of your local control over money, even if some of these proposals are revenue neutral. So none of them have gone forward, but that is also something that citizens should continue to monitor. And the Legislative Council also encouraged everyone to continue to follow up with the reauthorization of IDEA. for special education services. It has not been funded at the level that was promised ever since it was implemented, and that's something that school districts across the state are hopefully pushing forward. Moving forward, there will be a legislative breakfast on May 15th, 2020. School board members and members of the public would be encouraged to attend, and the PSBA Advocacy Day, March 23rd, 2020. The next meeting of the Legislative Council then will be this coming January 8th, 2020. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pennsylvania School Boards Association. Andrew?
Oh, PSBH. Right. So they send out a liaison bulletin once a month, and there are a couple of things from the bulletin that I just want to mention. So first of all, they aggressively fought to defeat efforts in the House of Representatives to pass a private school voucher plan under House Bill 1800. And there's one other issue there in the bulletin that's of note, that they're working with a couple of representatives to address vaping as an issue in schools and how to address that particular issue.
Thank you. Parks and Rec, either Andrew or Sarah?
We didn't have a meeting this past month, but next one is scheduled for Thursday, January 9th at 6 p.m. On the second floor.
Great, thank you. Radnor Alumni Council, Brad?
No report.
No report. Radnor Educational Foundation, Liz? Okay. Radnor High School Scholarship Fund, Jeff?
Just a quick note that we had a successful breakfast with Santa this past Saturday. It was good to see. I know some of my fellow board members. I came after, but to see our superintendent there sitting on Santa's lap. Looking forward to serving and attending my first board meeting in January.
Great, thank you. Oh.
I'll let you know if I get what I asked for.
Radnor Page, Sarah?
No report.
Okay. Radnor Committee for Special Education, Nancy?
No report.
All righty, let's see, it's a light month. Okay, board announcements. Our upcoming meetings, the Finance Committee meeting, as I said earlier, will be Tuesday, January 7th at 2 p.m. That's an unusual time in the administration ground floor conference room. Our Policy Committee meeting will be at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, January 14th in the ground floor conference room of the administration building. Our Curriculum and Facilities and Government Relations and Communications Committee meetings will be held Tuesday, January 21st, beginning at 5 p.m., again in the ground floor conference room of the administration building. And our next regularly scheduled business meeting will be Tuesday, January 28th at 7 p.m. in this building, the Radnor Shire Room, the Radnor Township's building. At this time, I will entertain a second round of public comment. Citizens are encouraged to address the board at this time to speak on matters of concern, official action, or deliberation which are or may be before the board. Once again, speakers are respectfully requested to avoid redundancy and to limit their comments to issues for which there was not previous opportunity to offer remarks. If you have not already done so, please place your name on the sign-in sheet at the back of the room. State your name, address, and topic to be addressed, and we ask that you limit your comments to not more than 4 minutes, as per Board Policy 006. If you are unable to attend tonight's meeting, you may submit your comments by email to boardcomments@rtsd.org or in writing to Mr. Michael Petiti, Radnor Township School District, 135 South Wayne Avenue, Wayne, PA, 19087. If there are questions, administration will review them, and the corresponding answers will be posted on the district's board docs website by the start of the first committee meeting of the following month. Is there any public comment? Welcome, Mr. Bajukas.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the board for the careful consideration of this matter, both dissenting and in favor. It's government work, and that's what the public expects. As we move out into the holiday season and you all go out and mingle with your friends in Wayne to address some of the issues that have been raised that might come up, Mr. Jubileer, what I would say to you, to say to people that you see is, you all have been made the de facto providers of athletic facilities in this township. That's what's happened. Ms. Dunn's laughing because I've said that over and over again in the meetings. You didn't ask for this. That's what you have. And so you have to provide a safe and appropriate area for the people that you're charging to use those fields. You weren't asked for that, but that's the responsibility you all have been given. And this is an appropriate step in that regard. To the teachers, what I would say is, it is inexplicable for us to continue to pay for declining facilities out of our operating budget. So you want to talk about the costs and expense of continuing to operate in this way? If you comply with code, and code is coming when we do this project, you're going to have to put 30 bathrooms in this area. 30 porta-johns. If we don't want to build it, 30 porta-johns are going to have to go up in this area. Those cost $100 a month, 10 months a year. This is what we're talking about in these committee meetings. 10 months a year, $30,000, 20 years, $600,000 that doesn't go to education. If you want to offer 300 people $25 a month, 10 months a year to go over to PSC, add that up, that's $75,000 a year. Over 10 years, that's $750,000. That's the kind of things we're talking about. There's things like Title IX that have not been applied to these facilities. They need to be equal and accessible. So when you start talking about why you want to borrow the money to fix this, it makes sense physically, we've heard today, but it also gives you the ability to use the car example. You have a 35-year-old car that you're putting $1,000 a month into. It's time to get a new one, finance it, and free up some of that money. I think from a community standpoint, I don't speak on behalf of all these groups. My kids have already gone. They're already out of this. They're never going to see the benefit of this, which is fine because it's the right thing to do. But there is not an appetite to donate to a project that really should have been done 15, 20 years ago. That's my impression from talking to these people and bringing them together. If I thought there was somebody who could make this an easy fix and was going to write a check, I mean, I'm not allowed to ask anybody for that because of my job, but I'd certainly be telling Ken. You know, we would have had that conversation. So, again, thank you for the careful consideration. I know there's a lot more work to do. Your committee, the last thing I'd say is there's no one on the committee that wants any one thing. This comes from the 100+ people who showed up at the first 2 meetings with Schrader and told the committee what they wanted. This isn't for me. This isn't for Mr. Henkel. All of our kids are going to be gone. And this is the administration and your public and people emailing saying the parking's atrocious, the pool's atrocious, this needs to be fixed. And then us trying to solve the problem while thinking about the economics and putting together a sensible way to do this with the needs, not the wants, but the needs. So thank you very much. Have a great holiday season.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Dr. Winters.
Good evening. I know you've given this careful consideration, but I have a long history in Radnor, and I know that when athletic facilities are being mentioned in any way, shape, or form, we always get a huge audience. And I know that interest is high in our community. I also know that I believe when our swimming pool was put in, it was called the Radnor Community Pool for a reason, and because it was funded by the township as well as the school district. I know also when we've had things like turf fields put in before, some of that money was funded by other agencies outside the school district. I know in the past the Radnor Educational Foundation has been what we call a flow-through, perhaps, conduit for money that was contributed privately so that we could go into some of these fields. I think we really need to look at alternative funding sources. Not that what we have can't be done, not that there isn't a magic to having a low interest rate today, but we don't know in 6 months if that interest rate will be at the bottom again. So I think we need to be looking at a variety of options to not only provide what is needed, but also provide what we can afford. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you so much.